Long before history had a voice, the earth wrote its secrets in bone and stone. Colossal creatures vanished without a farewell, footprints appeared where no human should exist, and monuments rose that seem older than memory itself. What force reshaped entire species? What intelligence left marks we still struggle to read? Tonight, we follow the echoes of a world buried beneath time, through fossil fields, shattered continents, and clues locked in ancient rock, to uncover the biggest prehistoric mysteries ever found. So sit back, steady your nerves, and let's dive into the questions that refuse to stay extinct. At the edge of a frozen lake in Greenland, scientists drilled deep into ancient ice and pulled up a record of Earth's memory, layer upon layer of snowfall compacted into crystal pages. Within those layers, they found an abrupt signal, a sudden return to cold conditions after a period of warming. This interval, known as the Younger Dryas, began roughly 12,900 years ago and lasted more than a millennium. To climate researchers, it marks one of the most dramatic shifts in recent geological history. The conventional explanation is rooted in ocean circulation. As massive ice sheets melted at the end of the last ice age, fresh water poured into the North Atlantic, potentially weakening the system of currents that distributes heat around the globe. Without that circulation, temperatures in the Northern Hemisphere may have plunged almost overnight. Evidence for this scenario comes from marine sediments, ice cores, and pollen records showing ecosystems rapidly adjusting to colder, drier conditions. Yet scattered across this tidy narrative are fragments that refuse to fit neatly into place. In sites across North America and Europe, some researchers have reported thin, dark layers of sediment dating to the beginning of the Younger Dryas. Within them lie unusual materials: tiny magnetic spherules, elevated levels of platinum, and what appear to be shock-formed minerals, substances often associated with high-energy impacts. These findings gave rise to an alternative idea: that a comet or fragmented asteroid may have struck Earth or exploded in the atmosphere, triggering widespread fires and sudden cooling. Supporters of the impact hypothesis point to more than chemistry. They note the near-simultaneous disappearance of many large Ice Age animals, including mammoths and giant ground sloths. They also highlight cultural changes among early human populations, such as the fading of the Clovis tool tradition in North America. Could a cosmic event have altered climates, landscapes, and human history in a single moment? Mainstream researchers remain cautious. Many of the proposed impact markers have been contested, with some studies failing to replicate earlier results. Wildfire evidence, once thought to be global, appears uneven and region-specific. Critics argue that the extinction of megafauna and shifts in human culture can be explained by a combination of climate stress and human hunting without invoking a catastrophe from space. From this view, the Younger Dryas represents a complex climate oscillation rather than a sudden disaster. Still, the idea persists, partly because the Younger Dryas itself is so abrupt. In some ice core records, temperature drops seem to occur within decades, an eye blink in geological time. This speed invites questions. What mechanism could cool half a hemisphere so quickly? Could an impact into an ice sheet have injected dust and vapor into the atmosphere, dimming sunlight and disrupting weather patterns? Or could such evidence instead reflect regional processes amplified by fragile post-Ice Age systems? Archaeological sites add another layer of uncertainty. In parts of North America, black sediment horizons appear above older occupation layers and below younger ones, as if marking a pause in human presence. Some interpret this as a sign of sudden upheaval. Others see it as a coincidence of soil formation and climate change. The same traces can be read as either disruption or gradual adaptation, depending on the lens used. What makes the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis compelling is not its certainty, but its challenge to easy answers. It asks whether Earth's recent past was shaped only by internal climate rhythms, or whether forces beyond the planet occasionally intervened. It also highlights how evidence can point in multiple directions, depending on how it is assembled. The ice cores remain silent on intent, and the sediment layers do not reveal their full story. Whether driven by shifting oceans or a brief encounter with a celestial body, the younger Dryas stands as a reminder that stability is not guaranteed. And as new cores are drilled and new sites uncovered, one question lingers quietly beneath the data. Was this ancient cold snap born from Earth alone, or did something fall from the sky and change the course of the world? If the sudden cold of the younger Dryas reminds us how fragile Earth's balance can be, then the traces left behind from that same distant age ask an even more personal question. Who was here to witness it? As climates shifted and glaciers advanced and retreated, something else was moving across the landscape, quietly, deliberately, leaving marks that would sleep beneath the ground for thousands of years. In the heart of what is now New Mexico lies White Sands National Park, a vast basin of pale gypsum dunes that stretch to the horizon like frozen waves. By day, the surface glows under an unforgiving sun. By night, it cools into silence. Beneath this powdery desert once lay a network of shallow lakes fed by Ice Age meltwater. Along their muddy shores, something remarkable happened. Humans walked here. The first signs were subtle. Faint depressions appearing after seasonal rains stripped away thin layers of sand. To the untrained eye, they looked like irregular pits, but archaeologists saw a pattern. Heels, arches, toes, human footprints, preserved in hardened sediment and protected for millennia by shifting dunes. Radiocarbon dating of ancient seeds trapped within the layers suggested an astonishing age. More than 21,000 years old, placing people in North America during the height of the last ice age. This finding unsettled long-standing assumptions. For much of the 20th century, the dominant view held that the first Americans arrived around 13,000 years ago, crossing a land bridge from Asia and spreading south through an ice-free corridor. The White Sands footprints, however, seem to tell a different story, one of humans already present long before the glaciers retreated. If the dates are correct, these travelers walked this lake bed while massive ice sheets still covered much of the northern continent. The trackways themselves offer a quiet narrative. Some belong to adults, others are clearly those of children. One set shows a person carrying a load, possibly a child, resting it down, then lifting it again. Nearby, giant sloth tracks intersect with human ones, suggesting moments when people and megafauna shared the same shoreline. In one sequence, a human path curves around the prints of a mammoth, as if avoiding it. These are not abstract artifacts. They are gestures frozen in time. Mainstream interpretations lean toward a bold but careful conclusion. Small groups of humans may have reached the Americas far earlier than once believed, perhaps by following coastal routes along the Pacific, using simple boats or traveling across exposed shorelines during periods of lower sea level. The White Sands footprints could represent inland movements from such coastal migrations, drawn to freshwater sources in an otherwise harsh environment. Yet questions linger beneath the surface of these claims. Some researchers have raised concerns about the dating method, noting that aquatic plants can absorb old carbon from groundwater, potentially skewing results. Others point out that human presence so early would require not just survival but adaptation, tools, knowledge of ice age ecosystems, and social networks capable of supporting long-distance travel. Beyond the scientific debate, more speculative interpretations have emerged. Could these tracks represent an even earlier wave of migration, now lost to time? Might there have been multiple routes into the continent, not just one? A few fringe voices have gone further, suggesting unknown cultures or forgotten populations whose stories ended before written history could begin. These ideas remain outside accepted models, yet they persist because the footprints themselves are so undeniably human and so unexpectedly old. The landscape adds to the mystery. Today, White Sands is a dry desert, but during the Ice Age it was a wet basin surrounded by grasslands and roaming herds. As the climate warmed and cooled, the lakes expanded and shrank, layering sediments like pages in a book. Each footprint pressed into soft mud, dried in the sun, and was sealed by wind-blown sand. Preservation depended on a rare balance of moisture and exposure. How many other trackways formed like this, only to be erased by erosion or buried too deeply to be found? There is also the matter of purpose. Why were people here at all? The area would have offered water and animals, but it lay far from any known ancient camps or tool sites. Were these travelers passing through, following migrating herds? Or did they live nearby, leaving behind settlements that remain undiscovered beneath dunes and gypsum flats? When the footprints were first revealed, they appeared briefly after rain, then vanished again as winds reshaped the surface. This cycle of appearance and disappearance mirrors the way early human history itself emerges in fragments, visible for a moment, then hidden once more. Each new exposure reveals more paths, some crossing, some diverging, forming a quiet choreography across the ancient lakebed. In the broader story of prehistoric mysteries, White Sands stands as a counterpoint to catastrophic theories like cosmic impacts or sudden climate collapse. Here, the focus is not on what fell from the sky, but on who walked the earth. It shifts the mystery from disaster to presence, from extinction to endurance. While the younger Dryas asks what changed the world, these footprints ask who endured through that change. And yet, they do not answer everything. They do not tell us where these people came from, what language they spoke, or how they understood the world around them. They only show movement, step after step, across wet ground under an Ice Age sky. As the wind continues to sculpt the dunes and rain briefly uncovers new impressions, the White Sands footprints remain suspended between certainty and wonder. Are they the earliest chapter of human history in the Americas, or one piece of a much older, still hidden story? And if such fragile traces can survive for over 20 millennia, what other journeys might still be waiting beneath the sands, unseen and unspoken? If the footprints of White Sands show us movement across an ancient landscape, then the next mystery draws us inward, away from open plains and into the quiet chambers of stone where time itself seems to pause. From windswept dunes to a single opening in a mountain, the search for early human stories now leads to a place that appears ordinary at first glance, yet holds one of the most surprising discoveries in prehistoric science. High in the Altai Mountains of southern Siberia, where forest meets rock and winter lingers long into spring, a narrow cave mouth opens into the hillside. Snow gathers at its entrance, and cold air drifts outward even in summer. This is Denisova Cave, a modest shelter used for thousands of years by animals, travelers, and something far more elusive. Its interior is dim and layered with sediment, each layer a quiet record of passing ages. Ash from ancient fires, stone tools, fragments of bone, and dust carried in by the wind. For decades, the cave was known to archaeologists as a Neanderthal site. Stone implements and animal remains suggested repeated occupation during the Ice Age. Then, in 2008, a tiny fragment of finger bone was uncovered from a deep layer of sediment. It was small enough to be overlooked, yet when scientists extracted its DNA, the result was unexpected. The genetic sequence did not match modern humans. It did not match Neanderthals. It belonged to a previously unknown group of ancient humans, now called Denisovans, named after the cave itself. This discovery reshaped the human family tree. Instead of a simple story of one species replacing another, Denisova Cave revealed a branching pattern of overlapping lives. Genetic evidence showed that Denisovans interbred with both Neanderthals and modern humans. Traces of their DNA still exist today, particularly among people in parts of Melanesia, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific. A ghost population, known almost entirely through genetic echoes, had left its mark on living humanity. Yet physical remains of Denisovans are astonishingly rare. Aside from the finger bone and a few teeth, almost nothing of their skeleton has been found. Their appearance must be inferred from genetics and comparison to related species. Were they tall or short, robust or slender? Did they resemble Neanderthals, or were they closer to modern humans in form? The cave does not say. It keeps its images hidden. What Denisova Cave does offer is a sense of continuity. Layers show that different groups occupied it at different times: Neanderthals, Denisovans, and later modern humans. They did not merely pass through. They lived here, made tools, worked animal hides, and shaped their surroundings. Jewelry has been found as well: a polished green stone bracelet, pierced animal teeth, and beads made with care. These objects suggest not just survival, but expression, perhaps identity, perhaps belief. Mainstream interpretation holds that Denisovans were a sister group to Neanderthals, diverging from a common ancestor hundreds of thousands of years ago. Over time, they adapted to high altitude and cold environments, as suggested by genetic traits linked to oxygen use and immune response. One gene variant inherited from Denisovans allows some modern populations to thrive at extreme elevations, such as the Tibetan Plateau. Their legacy, in this sense, is biological as well as historical. But gaps remain. The Denisovans' geographic range is still unclear. Fossils linked to them have been tentatively identified in China and Southeast Asia, yet confirmation is difficult. Did they roam across much of Asia, or were they confined to certain regions? Were they a single population, or a collection of related groups spread over vast distances? Speculation enters where evidence thins. Some researchers wonder whether Denisovans may have been more culturally complex than their sparse remains suggest. The presence of fine jewelry deep in the cave raises questions about symbolic behavior. Did they share traditions with Neanderthals? Did they teach modern humans certain skills, or borrow from them in return? The cave records interaction, but not conversation. More fringe ideas drift at the edges of this discussion. Could Denisovans represent not a single group, but several unknown human branches, their identities blended together by genetic classification? Might there be other caves, other valleys, holding remains of similar populations yet to be found? These ideas sit beyond established models, but they arise naturally from the silence left by missing bones and uncharted migrations. The cave itself contributes to the uncertainty. Its layers are not perfectly ordered. Disturbances from animals, water, and human activity blur the timeline. A stone tool might shift downward, a bone fragment upward. Interpreting its story requires caution, patience, and an acceptance that some chapters are incomplete. There is also the question of coexistence. Denisova Cave appears to have been used by different human groups at overlapping times. Did they meet? Did they recognize each other as kin, rivals, or something else entirely? Genetic evidence proves interbreeding occurred, but the nature of those encounters, peaceful, tense, or routine, remains unknowable. In the broader context of prehistoric mysteries, Denisova Cave stands as a reminder that discovery does not always come in dramatic form. Sometimes it arrives as a bone no longer than a fingernail, buried in cold soil, waiting for technology to reveal what eyes cannot see. It challenges the idea that human evolution followed a single path, and instead, suggests a braided history of crossings and exchanges. As researchers continue to sift through sediment and refine genetic tools, new fragments may emerge. More bones, more artifacts, more clues. Each one will add detail, but also raise new questions. For now, Denisova Cave remains a threshold between what is known and what is imagined, a quiet hollow in the mountains that once sheltered an entire branch of humanity. And as the wind moves through the trees outside its entrance and snow gathers again at its mouth, the cave seems to hold its secrets close. Who exactly were the Denisovans, and how many other human stories lie buried beside them, waiting in the dark for their moment to be heard? If Denisova Cave reminds us how many human stories remain hidden in the earth, then the next mystery shifts our focus from who we were to what the planet itself once did. From a quiet cave in the mountains, the trail now leads to a vast body of water in Southeast Asia, a place so serene today that it seems incapable of the violence written into its past. Lake Toba stretches across northern Sumatra like an inland sea, framed by green hills and drifting mist. Its surface is calm, broken only by fishing boats and the slow movement of clouds reflected in the water. But this lake is not simply a lake. It is the flooded scar of one of the largest volcanic eruptions known to science, a supereruption that occurred roughly 74,000 years ago. Beneath the water lies a caldera nearly 100 kilometers long, the remnant of a blast so powerful it reshaped the land and, perhaps, altered the course of human history. Geological evidence reveals the scale of the event. Thick layers of volcanic ash, known as tephra, have been found as far away as the Indian subcontinent and the Arabian Peninsula. Ice cores from Greenland show a sudden spike in sulfur particles around the same time, suggesting that ash and aerosols circled the globe. The eruption is estimated to have expelled more than 2,000 cubic kilometers of material into the atmosphere, far exceeding anything witnessed in recorded history. Mainstream science proposes that this eruption may have triggered a volcanic winter. Sunlight would have been partially blocked by ash and sulfuric acid droplets, cooling the planet for years, perhaps decades. Some climate models suggest global temperatures could have dropped several degrees. Rainfall patterns may have shifted, forests may have retreated, and food sources may have become scarce. In this view, Toba was not just a regional catastrophe, but a global one. It is here that the story intersects with humanity. Around the time of the eruption, early modern humans were already present in Africa and parts of Asia. Genetic studies have revealed a curious pattern. Human DNA today shows relatively low diversity compared to many other species. One explanation for this is a population bottleneck, a period when human numbers dropped dramatically, leaving only a small group to repopulate the world. Some researchers have proposed that the Toba Supereruption caused such a bottleneck, reducing the human population to perhaps only a few thousand breeding individuals. If this scenario is correct, then every person alive today would be descended from those few survivors. The eruption would not just be a geological event, but a defining moment in human ancestry. It suggests a time when humanity stood close to extinction, held in place by climate and chance. Yet the evidence is not uniform. Archaeological sites in parts of Africa and India show signs of continuous human occupation across the period of the eruption. Stone tools appear before and after the ash layers, suggesting that at least some populations endured without a complete collapse. This challenges the idea of a single, global bottleneck. Instead, it hints at a more complex picture, severe regional impacts combined with pockets of resilience. Why might survival have been uneven? Some areas may have been shielded from the worst effects of cooling and drought. Coastal regions could still provide food through fishing and shellfish gathering. Forest refuges may have supported small groups when open landscapes failed. The eruption may not have erased humanity, but tested it, filtering which groups could adapt and which could not. Speculation begins where certainty fades. Did Toba shape human behavior as much as human numbers? Some theories suggest that environmental stress could have encouraged greater cooperation, more efficient tool-making, or new migration routes. Could the challenges following the eruption have accelerated cultural development? Or did they simply delay it, slowing the spread of populations across Asia and beyond? There are also questions about the eruption's immediate impact. Was the cooling rapid or gradual? Did darkness last weeks, months, or longer? Could massive wildfires have followed as ash settled onto dry vegetation? Geological records give clues, but not a complete timeline. Like Denisova Cave, Lake Toba preserves layers, but not a full narrative. Fringe interpretations drift at the edges of these debates. Some imagine Toba as a near-apocalyptic event, one that reset human history entirely. Others wonder whether ancient oral traditions of great floods, dark skies, or fiery mountains might trace back to this moment. These ideas cannot be proven, yet they persist because the scale of the eruption invites them. When a single event alters climate across continents, it is difficult not to search for echoes of it in memory and myth. There is also the question of coincidence. Around the same broad period, other hominin groups such as Neanderthals and Denisovans were living across Eurasia. If Toba affected modern humans, did it affect them as well? Did it alter the balance between species, opening or closing corridors of migration? Genetic evidence suggests interbreeding continued long after this time, but the environmental pressures may have changed where and how such encounters occurred. Today, Lake Toba is quiet again. Villages dot its shores. Crops grow where ash once fell. The caldera has softened into hills and islands. Only careful measurements of rock layers and distant ice cores reveal what happened here. It is a reminder that the planet's most dramatic moments can be hidden behind peaceful scenery. In the broader story of prehistoric mysteries, the Toba Supereruption stands as a test of scale. It asks whether Earth itself can act as a gatekeeper to human survival, and whether our species' success was ever guaranteed. It also forces us to consider how much of our past is shaped by events we barely remember and scarcely understand. As scientists continue to refine climate models and uncover new archaeological sites, the role of Toba remains uncertain. Was it a turning point that nearly erased us, or simply one hardship among many in a long struggle to endure? Did it shape who we are, or merely remind us how fragile existence can be? The lake keeps its silence, reflecting the sky above it, while deep below, layers of ash and stone preserve the aftermath of an ancient explosion. And as we piece together its story, one question lingers in the stillness. Was the Toba Supereruption the moment humanity almost vanished, or just another chapter in a far older, far more complicated journey? If the Toba Supereruption reminds us of the planet's raw power, then the Nataruk site turns our gaze back to the human story, revealing that the dangers of prehistory were not only environmental, but also profoundly human. From volcanic calderas and Ice Age caves, we now move to the banks of an ancient lake in East Africa, where the echoes of one of the oldest known acts of interpersonal violence still lie frozen in time. Nataruk lies in the Turkana Basin of northern Kenya, a landscape of reddish clay and dry scrub, punctuated by low hills and the distant outline of mountains. Today it is quiet, with dust drifting across open plains, but 12,000 years ago, or perhaps a little longer, this was a lakeshore alive with activity. Groups of hunter-gatherers moved through the reeds and shallow waters, fishing, foraging, and tending to their young. Life would have been precarious, but sustainable, a delicate balance with the environment and with one another. The discovery here, however, tells a story far from tranquil. In the early 2000s, a team of archaeologists uncovered skeletal remains scattered across a shallow lagoon margin. At first, the site seemed ordinary, bones from a settlement, perhaps victims of disease or natural death. But closer examination revealed something far more disturbing. The skeletons bore sharp force trauma, blunt injuries, and evidence of violent deaths. Some individuals were found with hands tied behind their backs, others lying face down, and children and infants were among the victims. Radiocarbon dating placed the site around 10,000 BC, during the late Pleistocene, a time when humans had been living in groups across Africa for tens of thousands of years. Mainstream interpretation frames Nataruk as a massacre, a snapshot of early human conflict preserved by chance in a wetland environment. Here, unlike cave sites or open plains, waterlogged conditions slowed decomposition and preserved fragile bone, allowing scientists to reconstruct the scene with unusual clarity. The findings suggest that small-scale, organized violence existed among hunter-gatherer communities far earlier than previously thought, challenging the long-held assumption that such societies were largely egalitarian and non-violent. Yet the motivations behind the event remain a mystery. Was this an isolated act of aggression, perhaps over territory or resources? Or does it represent a wider pattern of intergroup conflict in late Pleistocene Africa? The skeletal evidence alone cannot answer these questions, leaving room for both cautious scientific interpretation and speculative inquiry. Some researchers suggest competition for lakeshore access, fishing grounds, or seasonal camps could have sparked clashes. Others propose that rising populations or climatic pressures may have increased tensions between neighboring groups. The scene is haunting in its human immediacy. Adults appear to have been attacked while standing or sitting. Children, helpless, were also killed. Weapons were likely simple: stones, clubs, and possibly sharpened bone, but their impact was lethal. The careful positioning of some bodies suggests the attackers may have subdued their victims, and yet nothing survives to explain the broader social context. Did the assailants act as a unit, or were these spontaneous acts of aggression? Were there survivors who carried memories of the violence back to other settlements? Fringe theories, while unverified, raise further possibilities. Some suggest that Nataruk could represent early ritualized conflict, a form of proto-warfare codified in human behavior before the emergence of permanent settlements. Others wonder whether the massacre reflects early competition intensified by environmental stress, perhaps even linked indirectly to the after-effects of broader climatic events such as the younger Dryas or regional droughts. These interpretations remain speculative, but they underscore the profound questions raised by the evidence. What drives humans to violence, and how long has that impulse existed in our species? Nataruk also intersects with the broader story of human adaptation and survival. Unlike mass extinctions or volcanic winters, the threat here was not environmental. It was social. It reminds us that early humans navigated not only ice, fire, and famine, but also one another. The site provides a rare, visceral glimpse into the dangers that could arise from human competition, even among small, mobile groups. Archaeologically, the preservation of Nataruk is extraordinary. Waterlogged sediments slowed decay, revealing injuries that would otherwise have vanished. Yet much remains unseen. Only a fraction of the population may have been uncovered. Other massacres, unrecorded by chance, could have left no trace. What else remains hidden beneath the sediments of Africa's lakes and rivers awaiting discovery? In the broader context of prehistoric mysteries, Nataruk stands apart. It is not a story of extinction, climate, or cosmic catastrophe. It is a story of humans confronting one another, of mortality shaped by intention rather than nature. It challenges assumptions about the origins of violence and forces us to confront uncomfortable truths. That conflict, like cooperation, is deeply rooted in our evolutionary past. And yet, questions persist. Were the victims and attackers from the same cultural group or different ones? How often did such events occur, and why do so few traces survive? Could understanding Nataruk shed light on the social dynamics of other early human societies across Africa and beyond? As the Turkana Basin stretches into the horizon, quiet once more, the Nataruk site holds its secrets beneath layers of sediment and time. Bones tell a story of sudden violence, but they do not speak of intent, fear, or sorrow. They remind us that even in the most remote corners of prehistory, human life was fragile, and mortality could arrive suddenly, without warning. And as archaeologists continue to examine the site and its context, one lingering question remains. How many other human stories of survival, conflict, and loss from the distant past lie still buried, waiting for the sands and lakes to reveal them? If Nataruk reminds us of the fragility of early human life, then the story now leads us to a place of solemn reflection, a site that speaks not of violence or survival alone, but of ritual, memory, and the earliest hints of social complexity. From lakeshores where life could end in a day, we now move to the frozen plains of Eastern Europe, where a small community chose to honor their dead in ways that continue to intrigue archaeologists and historians alike. Sungir lies near the town of Vladimir in Russia, on the upper reaches of the Klyazma River. Today, the landscape is quiet, blanketed in snow during long winters, and dotted with birch and pine. But around 28,000 BC, during the Upper Paleolithic, this open steppe supported hunter-gatherer bands who left traces of their lives not only in tools and shelters, but in extraordinary burials. Excavations revealed graves that are among the most elaborate of the Ice Age world, offering a glimpse into the symbolic and social dimensions of early human existence. The most famous finds at Sungir are the burials of two children, ages roughly 10 and 12. They were interred with hundreds of beads made from mammoth ivory, hundreds of perforated ivory rods and ivory spears placed alongside their bodies. In one grave, the beads were arranged to cover the body almost entirely, forming a dense ornamentation that must have taken weeks, perhaps months, to prepare. The careful positioning and abundance of grave goods suggest that these were not ordinary burials. They were deliberate, ceremonial, and highly significant to the community that created them. Mainstream interpretations view the Sungir burials as evidence of emerging social hierarchy, ritual complexity, and symbolic thought among Upper Paleolithic humans. The investment of labor in preparing these graves indicates that the children held an unusual status. They were likely from a family or lineage of considerable importance. The presence of finely crafted tools and ornaments hints at both technical skill and aesthetic sensibility, demonstrating that early humans were capable of abstract thought, artistic expression, and elaborate cultural practices far earlier than often assumed. Yet questions abound. Why were these particular children buried with such care? Did their age confer symbolic meaning, perhaps representing continuity or vulnerability? Or were they honored for specific achievements, or because of familial connections we can no longer trace? Even the reason for burying children together, or the possibility that they were twins, has been debated. DNA analysis suggests they were not closely related, yet the care lavished upon them parallels burials usually reserved for adult leaders in other cultures. What did this reveal about the beliefs and values of these early societies? The burials also offer hints of broader ritual practices. Human figures were carved in ivory, beads were meticulously arranged, and red ochre stained some bones, suggesting symbolic associations with blood, life, or protection. Could these represent attempts to ensure safe passage into an afterlife, or to preserve the social memory of the deceased within the living community? Some researchers speculate that such practices may reflect an early form of ancestor worship or communal cohesion, though certainty remains elusive. Fringe interpretations deepen the mystery. Some suggest that the elaborate burials indicate a form of prehistoric elite status, possibly even hinting at social stratification far earlier than conventional models suggest. Others ponder whether the burials reflect more than social rank. Could they represent spiritual leaders, shamans, or individuals believed to possess unique knowledge or abilities? The evidence is tantalizing but incomplete, leaving room for both imagination and scientific inquiry. The technical skill evident at Sungir is also remarkable. Carving hundreds of beads from mammoth ivory, creating symmetrical patterns, and assembling the burial displays would have required sustained, coordinated effort. Did this work involve only the family or an entire community? What tools and techniques allowed such precision in a world without metallurgy? The labor invested transforms the graves from mere resting places into monuments, bridging the material and the symbolic, the living and the dead. Sungir also raises questions about human cognition and identity. The burials suggest an understanding of social memory and continuity, a recognition that individuals can be remembered, honored, and integrated into a community narrative after death. How widespread were such practices? Did other groups, now lost to history, create equally elaborate rituals that never survived? And what does this tell us about the development of language, symbolism, and culture at the edge of human prehistory? As with Nataruk, the site emphasizes preservation in unique conditions. The cold, stable sediments of Sungir allowed fragile ivory, bone, and even traces of red ochre to survive tens of thousands of years. In other regions, such delicate materials would have decayed, leaving only hints of human activity. The cave and open-air sites together create a patchwork record, but one that is incomplete, fragmented, and full of gaps. In the broader story of prehistoric mysteries, Sungir occupies a place of quiet fascination. It does not speak of cosmic disasters or sudden catastrophes. Instead, it speaks of intention, care, and the early emergence of symbolic thought. It reveals that even tens of thousands of years ago, humans were capable of planning, artistry, and ritualized behavior that shaped their social worlds in profound ways. And yet, as the snow drifts across the plains of Vladimir and the Klyazma River winds silently past, many questions remain unanswered. Why these children? Why this labor? And why this display? How did their community interpret death, memory, and status? Could there be other Sungirs, hidden beneath sediments and time, waiting to reveal further chapters of human symbolic life? The burials at Sungir remind us that the past is never fully silent, but it also reminds us that much of its story is still waiting to be uncovered, understood, and marveled at. If the Sungir burials reveal the human capacity for ritual and symbolic thought, then our next story shifts to movement, patience, and the slow unfolding of migration, a chapter where humans faced not only environmental challenges, but the uncertainty of vast frozen landscapes. From the artistry of burials on the Eurasian plains, we now turn northward, to the threshold of two continents, where an entire population may have paused in the shadow of ice before stepping into the Americas. Beringia, the vast land bridge that once connected Siberia and Alaska, is now mostly hidden beneath the waters of the Bering Strait. During the last glacial maximum, around 26,000 to 19,000 years ago, sea levels dropped as massive ice sheets trapped water, exposing tens of thousands of square kilometers of tundra, rivers, and hills. This frigid but habitable expanse stretched for hundreds of miles, a corridor of survival in a world of ice. Winds swept across open plains, mosses and sedges clung to the soil, and herds of grazing animals, bison, mammoth, horses, provided sustenance for those who could endure the cold. It is in this isolated wilderness that scientists have proposed the Beringian Standstill. Genetic studies suggest that ancestors of Native Americans spent millennia in isolation here, separated from other Eurasian populations. Modern DNA indicates that this group remained largely in Beringia, evolving independently, before moving south into the Americas as glaciers retreated and corridors opened. This period of stasis, estimated to last several thousand years, offers a glimpse of human patience and adaptation in extreme environments. A waiting game played out across snow, wind, and frozen riverbeds. Archaeological evidence in the region is scarce. The harsh conditions of permafrost, shifting sediments, and rising sea levels have erased most traces of camps, tools, and hearths. Yet the genetic record is clear. A distinct population bottleneck occurred during this period, followed by a sudden expansion into North and South America. How did these early humans survive for generations in such isolation? What strategies allowed them to endure cold, seasonal shortages, and limited resources? These questions remain central to understanding the Beringian Standstill. Mainstream interpretations suggest that small bands relied on hunting large mammals, fishing in glacial rivers, and gathering seasonal plant foods. Clothing and shelter would have been essential. Perhaps layered hides, windbreaks of driftwood, and temporary huts provided protection. The persistence of these groups over millennia, often in relative isolation, speaks to resilience, ingenuity, and knowledge passed from one generation to the next. It also hints at the social cohesion required to survive when even minor mistakes could be fatal. Yet much about Beringia remains mysterious. Archaeologists debate whether there were multiple standstill populations or a single core group. Some evidence hints at sporadic contact with Siberian populations, raising questions about cultural exchange, interbreeding, and knowledge transmission. Could innovations, tools, or symbolic practices have traveled across the ice, even as the population remained isolated? Or did the standstill create a kind of cultural bottleneck alongside the genetic one? Fringe ideas explore even broader implications. Some researchers suggest that prolonged isolation in Beringia may have contributed to adaptations seen in modern Native American populations, not only genetic but possibly physiological, such as cold tolerance or metabolic traits. Others speculate that the standstill created a form of waiting culture, a society structured around patience, seasonal rhythms, and long-term planning, rather than immediate expansion or conquest. While intriguing, these ideas remain speculative, supported more by inference than direct evidence. The landscape itself adds to the mystery. Today, the Bering Strait and surrounding seas hide what was once a vast steppe. Tides, erosion, and tectonic activity have submerged the land, leaving underwater hills and channels where humans may have once hunted, camped, and moved. What tools, ornaments, or dwellings might lie beneath these waters, preserved in cold sediment? How many secrets of migration, survival, or cultural innovation remain locked below the waves? The Beringian Standstill also raises philosophical questions about human patience, timing, and adaptation. Unlike sudden disasters, like Toba, or abrupt conflicts, like Nataruk, this is a story of waiting, of measured endurance. It reminds us that survival is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is the quiet act of persistence, repeated over generations, that shapes the course of history. In the broader narrative of prehistoric mysteries, Beringia stands as both a threshold and a crucible. It is where human populations paused, adapted, and prepared to enter a new continent. It is where isolation met opportunity, and where the first Americans awaited the moment when glaciers would recede, rivers would open, and migration could continue. Yet questions linger in the ice and sediment. How exactly did these populations organize themselves? What cultural practices or social structures allowed survival for thousands of years in such extreme conditions? And how many other groups, like Beringia's standstill population, existed in isolation elsewhere, leaving only genetic traces and tantalizing hints of their lives? As the Arctic winds sweep across modern Alaska and eastern Siberia, the Beringian land bridge lies submerged and silent, a hidden stage for one of humanity's most remarkable pauses. And as scientists probe its depths, extract DNA from ancient bones, and model the movements of ice and water, one question remains, quietly suspended across time. What other stories of endurance, adaptation, and human patience are still hidden beneath the frozen and drowned landscapes of the prehistoric world? If Beringia teaches us patience and endurance across frozen landscapes, then Cima de los Huesos plunges us into darkness, literally and metaphorically, where the echoes of ancient lives accumulate in a subterranean chamber waiting to be discovered. From windswept plains and sunlit tundra, we now descend into a cave deep in northern Spain, where a pit of bones holds secrets that continue to challenge our understanding of human evolution. Cima de los Huesos, meaning pit of bones, lies in the Atapuerca Mountains near Burgos. The entrance is narrow, a small opening in limestone cliffs, and to reach the main chamber requires descending over 13 meters through tight vertical shafts. Inside, the cave opens into a wide, almost cathedral-like hollow, its walls echoing with the silence of tens of thousands of years. The floor is covered with hundreds of human bones, fossilized and intermingled, creating a scene that is at once eerie and profoundly moving. The remains, numbering over 6,500 individual bones from at least 28 people, date back roughly 430,000 years. They are classified as Homo heidelbergensis, an ancestor of both Neanderthals and modern humans, and they represent the largest collection of Middle Pleistocene hominin fossils ever found. What makes the site extraordinary is not merely the quantity, but the apparent deliberate accumulation. The bodies appear to have been deposited over centuries, consistently in this deep chamber with no signs of habitation or other debris. Mainstream interpretations have long debated the purpose of this accumulation. One hypothesis suggests that the pit functioned as a natural trap. Individuals may have fallen accidentally into the vertical shaft, unable to escape. Yet the consistent presence of nearly complete skeletons and the repeated use of the chamber over generations makes this explanation less satisfying. Could these early humans have understood death, ritual, and space well enough to intentionally place their dead in this isolated, almost inaccessible pit? The physical evidence is as intriguing as it is perplexing. The bones show some trauma, perhaps from falls, but overwhelmingly, they are intact, suggesting careful handling. The pit contains both adults and children, males and females, offering a demographic cross-section of a prehistoric population. Tools are sparse, and no fire or hearth evidence exists in the chamber. The isolation and repeated deposition point toward behaviors that are strikingly advanced for such an early period. Were these the first steps toward intentional burial, or do they represent a completely different cultural logic, one that remains unfamiliar to us? DNA extracted from the fossils has added another layer of mystery. Analysis of mitochondrial DNA links these individuals closely to Neanderthals, suggesting that the pit may reflect early Neanderthal ancestry or proto-Neanderthal communities. Yet questions remain. How did these hominins interact socially, and what prompted them to repeatedly use this chamber for deposition? Could Cima de los Huesos represent not only a funerary site, but also a symbolic center, a place where memory, identity, or group cohesion was enacted? Fringe interpretations, while unproven, add to the intrigue. Some suggest that this was an early form of ritual or proto-religious behavior, a precursor to later symbolic burial practices seen at sites like Sungir. Others speculate about collective mourning or even territorial marking. Perhaps placing bodies in the pit served as a statement to other groups, a signal of presence or dominance. While these ideas are conjectural, they reflect the profound challenge of interpreting human behavior tens of thousands of years in the past. The cave itself reinforces the sense of mystery. Its limestone walls create deep shadows. Its narrow entrance isolates the chamber from light and sound, and its vertical access makes repeated visits a feat of endurance and coordination. For early humans to have intentionally deposited bodies here, they would have needed planning, cooperation, and knowledge of the terrain. Could this suggest cognitive and social capabilities closer to modern humans than previously assumed for Homo heidelbergensis? Sima de los Huesos also raises broader questions about mortality, memory, and the human impulse to mark existence. Why choose a pit so difficult to reach? Why not leave bodies on the open ground, as many other contemporaneous groups appear to have done? Does this reflect a nascent awareness of ancestry, a form of respect, or an early attempt at symbolic permanence? Or could it be that the cave's depth and darkness had practical advantages, protection from scavengers, preservation of bodies, later interpreted as ritual? In the broader context of prehistoric mysteries, Sima de los Huesos bridges time and cognition. It shows us that even hundreds of thousands of years ago, humans, or their ancestors, were capable of behaviors that hint at foresight, social memory, and the beginnings of symbolic thought. Unlike Beringia, where survival demanded patience and mobility, or Sungir, where ritual and adornment marked identity, Sima de los Huesos confronts us with the intimate and haunting presence of death itself. And yet, as researchers continue to analyze bones, extract DNA, and map the cave's depths, countless questions remain unanswered. Were the pit deposits the work of a single community over centuries, or multiple groups across generations? What motivated repeated placement in such an inhospitable chamber? And how much of our understanding of early hominin behavior remains invisible, lost in the dark recesses of caves, waiting to be uncovered? As sunlight fades over the Atapuerca Mountains and the limestone cliffs cast long shadows across the landscape, Sima de los Huesos lies silent but not empty. Its bones speak across hundreds of millennia, hinting at lives, deaths, and perhaps intentions that we may never fully comprehend. It is a place where the past is both tangible and elusive, a chamber of mysteries that reminds us how deep, complex, and profoundly human the story of our ancestors truly is. If Sima de los Huesos plunges us into the dark intimacy of ancient death, then Blombos Cave illuminates a very different aspect of human existence, the flicker of creativity, abstraction, and symbolic thought. From the shadowed depths of limestone pits, we move to the sunlit shores of South Africa, where early humans left behind marks not of survival or ritualized burial, but of deliberate expression, a window into minds reaching beyond immediate needs, into imagination itself. Blombos Cave sits on a rocky promontory along the southern coast of South Africa, overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. Today, waves crash rhythmically against cliffs and dunes, gulls circle overhead, and winds carry the scent of salt and kelp. Around 100,000 BC, this cave was a refuge for small groups of Homo sapiens. The site offered protection from the elements, access to marine resources, and perhaps most importantly, a canvas upon which early humans began to externalize their thoughts. Inside the cave, archaeologists discovered a treasure trove of artifacts, but among the most remarkable are the engraved pieces of ochre. These small stones, often no larger than a palm, bear incised patterns, cross-hatched lines, parallel strokes, and abstract geometric motifs. The marks are intentional and precise, revealing a capacity for symbolic thinking, planning, and perhaps communication. Each engraving represents a choice, a deliberate action meant to leave a lasting impression on the world. Mainstream interpretations suggest that these engravings are among the earliest known examples of symbolic behavior in Homo sapiens. They indicate a capacity for abstract thought, previously thought to appear tens of thousands of years later. In essence, the creators of these engravings were experimenting with meaning itself, translating internal thought into visible, tangible form. Such behavior forms a bridge between mere survival and the development of culture, art, and language. Yet, the function of the engravings remains elusive. Were they purely decorative? Did they mark territory, convey social identity, or carry spiritual significance? Some researchers propose that the patterns could have served as memory aids or coded messages, linking group knowledge, resources, or rituals. Others suggest they may have been used in teaching, helping younger members of the group to learn social conventions, tracking systems, or symbolic association. The truth is lost to time, leaving only the enigmatic patterns themselves as silent testimony. Blombos Cave also yielded finely crafted bone tools, shell beads, and ochre fragments prepared for painting, suggesting that engraving was part of a broader repertoire of symbolic behavior. The combination of raw materials, labor, and creativity indicates a complex cognitive landscape, one where humans were aware of themselves as individuals capable of leaving lasting marks, capable of communicating beyond the immediacy of survival. How did these people understand abstraction? How did they conceive of meaning in a way that could be recorded, even temporarily, on stone? Some fringe interpretations extend the mystery even further. Could these markings represent the earliest forms of language, a precursor to writing? Might they have functioned as communal rituals, creating cohesion and shared identity among small bands? While there is no direct evidence to support such claims, the meticulous care evident in the engravings suggests that they were more than casual scratches. They were intentional acts with significance, whether social, personal, or spiritual. The environment itself amplifies the intrigue. Blombos Cave was both a shelter and a stage. The cave's walls, the ambient light from its entrance, and its proximity to the ocean may have influenced how patterns were made and perceived. Did sunlight illuminate the ochre in a specific way? Did the sound of waves or the scent of salt contribute to the ritual or contemplative process of engraving? We cannot know for certain, but considering the context underscores that prehistoric creativity was never divorced from environment. It was lived, situated, and deeply intertwined with daily experience. The ochre engravings challenge long-held assumptions about the evolution of human cognition. Previously, it was thought that symbolic behavior emerged largely in Europe around 40,000 BC. Blombos, however, pushes this timeline back by tens of thousands of years, suggesting that modern cognition and the urge to externalize thought arose in Africa long before Homo sapiens left the continent. It prompts us to reconsider the origins of art, ritual, and abstract thinking. And yet, for all its revelations, Blombos Cave does not answer all questions. Why these specific patterns? How widely were such practices shared among groups, and were they recognized and interpreted similarly across different bands? Could other, equally sophisticated symbolic behaviors exist elsewhere, buried under sediments or hidden in caves yet to be explored? In the broader narrative of prehistoric mysteries, the Blombos engravings offer a counterpoint to sites like Sima de los Huesos and Nataruk. Here, human ingenuity and symbolic expression emerge alongside survival and mortality, demonstrating that prehistoric life was not only about food, danger, or death, but also about thought, creativity, and perhaps even wonder. As the Atlantic waves lap against the cliffs today and gulls wheel overhead, Blombos Cave sits quietly, its engravings preserved in ochre and stone, whispering across the millennia. They remind us that our ancestors were not simply passive survivors, but active interpreters of the world around them, capable of imagining, creating, and marking their existence. And as researchers continue to study, debate, and uncover, one lingering question remains. What other hidden expressions of early human thought lie waiting in caves, sands, and sediments across the globe, still unseen, still silent, still waiting for us to notice? If Blombos Cave shows us the spark of human creativity, then the story now turns to the giants that once roamed alongside our ancestors, the mammoths, giant sloths, and saber-toothed cats that defined the Pleistocene world. From artistic expression to ecological dominion, these creatures were not merely background to human life. They shaped landscapes, survival strategies, and perhaps even the cultural imagination. Yet, as the Ice Age drew to a close, these colossal beings vanished, leaving only bones, footprints, and questions that remain unanswered. Across continents, from the grasslands of North America to the tundras of Siberia, the Pleistocene megafauna once moved in vast herds. Mammoths thundered across open plains, mastodons tore through forests, and giant ground sloths slowly plodded across South America. Their presence dominated ecosystems, creating pathways, influencing vegetation patterns, and shaping the very soils on which humans would later settle. Fossilized tracks, preserved in mud and ash, reveal their scale and movement. Coprolites provide a glimpse into their diet, and tusks, horns, and bones bear the marks of life, struggle, and sometimes conflict. Yet by around 10,000 BC, most of these giants disappeared. Across North and South America, Eurasia, and Australia, mammoths, giant kangaroos, woolly rhinoceroses, and other species vanished in what scientists call the Pleistocene megafauna extinction. It was one of the largest waves of extinction in Earth's recent history, and it happened within a span of only a few thousand years, a brief heartbeat in geological time. Mainstream explanations often point to a combination of climate change and human activity. The last ice age was ending. Glaciers retreated, temperatures rose, and habitats transformed. Forests replaced tundras, lakes expanded, and previously stable ecosystems became fragmented. At the same time, humans had spread across the continents, armed with spears, hunting strategies, and the capacity for coordinated effort. Could overhunting, even at low population densities, have tipped the balance, pushing species already stressed by environmental change toward extinction? Yet evidence is both compelling and contradictory. Some regions show clear signs of human interaction: butchered bones, hunting tools, and kill sites. In others, megafauna disappear without direct evidence of human predation. Climate models suggest that warming alone might have been sufficient to reduce populations, yet some species survived dramatic shifts while others did not. Why did woolly mammoths vanish from North America while elephants thrived in Africa? Why did some giant herbivores adapt to new environments, while others disappeared entirely? Fringe hypotheses deepen the mystery. Some researchers have explored cosmic triggers, suggesting that extraterrestrial impacts or supervolcanic eruptions could have accelerated environmental stress. Others consider disease or pathogen introduction, perhaps carried by humans or migrating species, as a contributing factor. While these theories remain speculative, they reflect the difficulty of untangling a complex extinction event that likely involved multiple interacting causes. The scale of disappearance is staggering. In North America alone, more than 70% of large mammal species vanished. In Australia, roughly 90% of megafauna were gone by 46,000 BC. Such losses reshaped ecosystems. Predators lost prey, vegetation changed without large herbivores, and humans, perhaps surprisingly, survived and eventually flourished in the altered world. Could the extinction of these giants have accelerated the development of human societies, forcing innovation, migration, and adaptation in ways that the Ice Age had not? Fossil evidence provides tantalizing snapshots. A mammoth skeleton with broken tusks may indicate hunting or conflict. Footprints preserved in mud reveal herds crossing ancient riverbeds, and isolated bones in caves or sediments show the slow, relentless passage of time. Yet gaps remain. Entire regions lack data, leaving questions about the timing, causes, and pace of extinctions unanswered. Could some megafauna have survived longer in refugees, their stories lost to erosion and sediment? The extinction of Pleistocene megafauna also raises questions about human behavior. Did early hunters deliberately target large animals, or were humans merely opportunistic? How did hunting pressure influence animal migration, reproduction, and social structures? And what role did early symbolic thought play? Did humans view these giants as sacred, dangerous, or simply necessary for survival? Archaeological sites suggest some interaction went beyond subsistence, perhaps even into ritual, yet the evidence is fragmentary. In the broader context of prehistoric mysteries, the megafauna extinction is both a natural and human story. It connects environmental shifts, evolutionary pressures, and the emergence of human societies. It reminds us that life on Earth is fragile, that even the largest and most dominant species can vanish within a few thousand years. Yet it also highlights resilience. Humans survived, adapted, and carried forward a world forever altered by the disappearance of these giants. And yet, despite decades of study, the story remains incomplete. Which factors mattered most? Climate, hunting, disease, or chance? Were some extinctions rapid and catastrophic, or slow and incremental? Could undiscovered sites hold evidence that would rewrite our understanding of these events? The bones, footprints, and tools that remain offer tantalizing clues. But the full narrative of the Pleistocene megafauna extinction is still hidden beneath layers of time, waiting to be uncovered. As the wind sweeps across the open plains where mammoths once roamed, and as rivers carve channels once crossed by giant herds, the memory of these colossal animals lingers. They were architects of ecosystems, companions and adversaries to early humans, and now, like the cave engravings, the buried bones of Sima de los Huesos, or the Beringian land bridge, they remind us that the prehistoric world was rich, complex, and far from fully understood. And so the question remains, what other secrets of life, death, and disappearance from the Pleistocene await discovery, silently preserved in sediment, ice, and stone? From the deep currents of earlier enigmas, the narrative now drifts northward, away from stone and bone towards something far more fragile and far more unexpected. In a place where time itself seemed unlikely to leave a trace, the Earth did exactly that. At the edge of the town of Schöningen, in northern Germany, a vast, open-cast lignite mine stretches across the landscape like a wound in the ground. Layer by layer, the soil has been peeled back, exposing sediments laid down hundreds of thousands of years ago. It is a quiet place today, flat, industrial, unremarkable at first glance, but beneath its surface, preserved in waterlogged earth, lay objects that would challenge long-held assumptions about our prehistoric past. Long, slender, and unmistakably deliberate, the Schöningen Spears emerged from the mud like messages from another world. Carved from spruce and pine, some measuring over 6 feet in length, these wooden weapons are dated to around 300,000 BC. That date alone is startling. Wood rarely survives for more than a few centuries, let alone hundreds of millennia. Yet here they were, carefully shaped, balanced, and astonishingly intact. Their pointed tips were hardened, likely by fire, and their centers of gravity closely resemble those of modern javelins. These were not crude sticks. they were engineered tools. The location of the find only deepened the intrigue. Alongside the spears were the remains of more than 20 horses, their bones bearing marks consistent with systematic butchery. The scene suggested a coordinated hunt, perhaps a seasonal ambush at the edge of an ancient lake. For decades, the prevailing view of early humans from this period painted them as opportunistic scavengers, reliant on chance and simplicity. The Schöningen Spears told a different story. According to mainstream archaeological interpretation, these weapons were likely crafted and used by Homo heidelbergensis, a hominin species often described as a transitional form between earlier humans and Neanderthals. If so, this would mean that complex hunting strategies, planning, cooperation, and skilled craftsmanship were already in place far earlier than once believed. The hunters of Schöningen were not merely surviving, they were adapting, organizing, and anticipating. But questions linger. Were these spears thrown from a distance, or used up close in dangerous confrontations with large prey? Experimental archaeology suggests they could do both. Their balance favors throwing, yet close-range use cannot be ruled out. Either scenario implies remarkable courage and an intimate understanding of animal behavior. More puzzling still is the level of foresight involved. Crafting a spear like this takes time. The wood must be selected, shaped, smoothed, and possibly cured. Fire may have been used not just for warmth, but as a tool for refinement. Such preparation suggests planning that extended beyond the immediate moment. It hints at memory, teaching, and the passing down of knowledge. And then there is the question of preservation. Why here? Why did these particular tools survive when countless others vanished? The answer lies partly in geology. The spears were buried in an oxygen-poor environment, sealed in wet sediments that slowed decay to a near halt. Yet even this explanation feels incomplete. The odds of discovery, of wooden weapons this old in this condition, are almost impossibly small. Because of that rarity, some researchers urge caution. Could these spears represent an exceptional case rather than the norm? Were they the work of an unusually advanced group, or even a single generation of innovators? And if so, how much has been lost elsewhere? Tools, technologies, entire traditions that left no trace behind. Beyond mainstream discussion, more speculative ideas quietly circulate. Some wonder whether the Schöningen site reflects not just hunting, but something closer to ritualized behavior. The careful placement of animals, the repeated use of the same location, could this have been a known gathering ground, returned to over generations? Others ask whether the sophistication of the spears implies cognitive abilities closer to modern humans than we are comfortable admitting. If such intelligence existed 300,000 years ago, why does it appear so faintly in the archaeological record? There are also debates about symbolism. While no carvings or markings have been conclusively identified on the spears, their uniformity raises questions. Were they purely functional, or did they carry social meaning, status, identity, belonging within the group? In societies without writing, objects often speak where words cannot. None of these ideas overturn established science, but they stretch its edges. They remind us that prehistory is not a fixed narrative, but a shifting mosaic assembled from fragments. Each discovery fills one gap while opening several more. What the Schöningen Spears undeniably do is force a reevaluation of early human capability. They blur the line between primitive and advanced, suggesting that intelligence did not arrive suddenly, but flickered into existence long before it left clear traces behind. They invite us to imagine a world where humans stood on the shores of ancient lakes, gripping finely made weapons, communicating silently as herds moved in the distance. And yet, for all that has been learned, the spears remain incomplete messengers. We do not know the names of their makers, the sounds of their language, or the beliefs that guided their actions. We see the tools, but not the hands that released them, or the thoughts that shaped them. So the mystery lingers in the quiet earth of Schöningen. If such skill and coordination existed so long ago, what other chapters of human history have vanished without a trace? And how many more stories, crafted in wood, spoken in voices we can no longer hear, are still waiting beneath our feet? From the open plains and river valleys of northern Europe, our journey now shifts southward to the rugged landscapes of the Levant, a region where limestone hills rise abruptly above the valleys, and caves punctuate the cliffs like silent sentinels of time. Here, in the hills and wadis of what is today northern Palestine, the earth has preserved some of the earliest traces of a profoundly human practice: burial. At Qafzeh and Skhul, two cave sites separated by mere kilometers yet separated in time and mystery, archaeologists uncovered something that would forever change our understanding of early Homo sapiens. The caves are unassuming at first glance, narrow entrances leading into dark chambers, their interiors cool and shadowed, littered with stalagmites and centuries of sediment. But within these quiet chambers lay evidence of care, intention, and perhaps even belief. At Qafzeh, excavations revealed the remains of at least 15 individuals, dating back roughly 100,000 years BC. Some were children, some adults. They were not haphazardly discarded, as one might expect of early hominins. Instead, many were positioned deliberately, sometimes in fetal-like poses, suggesting awareness of the body, of death, and perhaps of what comes after. Accompanying a few burials were simple grave goods, pieces of ochre, carefully chosen flint tools, and in one remarkable case, a deer antler placed near the head of a child. The evidence suggests more than mere disposal. It hints at ritual, symbolism, and a conscious acknowledgement of mortality. Not far away, at Skhul, the story deepens. Skhul Cave has yielded the remains of at least 10 individuals, interred between 100,000 and 90,000 years BC. Here, too, the burials show intentionality. Some skeletons were laid on their sides, others were extended. Ochre was present in several graves, staining the surrounding soil a deep red, a color long associated with life, blood, and perhaps the passage into another world. It is impossible to look at these sites without sensing that these early humans understood something about death that reaches beyond the purely practical. These discoveries pose a profound question. Were these our distant relatives beginning to grapple with mortality in a symbolic way? Or were we witnessing the emergence of something far more abstract: belief, memory, identity? Mainstream anthropology interprets these burials as among the earliest evidence of symbolic thought, a step toward behaviors we often associate with modern humans. Yet, for a practice so seemingly universal today, the context in which it arose remains obscure. Why here? Why then? And what guided the choice of position, of placement, of accompanying items? Some of the burials invite even more speculation. In Qafzeh, a young woman was found with her hands covering her face as if in mourning, or perhaps in protection. Another individual was buried with a carefully arranged group of bones from animals, possibly remnants of a meal, or perhaps part of a ritual offering. Such details suggest a level of intention and planning that is difficult to explain purely through survivalist behavior. There is an artistry here, a language of the dead spoken without words, preserved in soil and bone. Yet, mysteries remain. The use of ochre is especially puzzling. While some suggest it was purely decorative, others propose that it may have held spiritual significance, a symbolic bridge between the living and the dead. Could this early application of pigment indicate an embryonic form of religious or cultural expression? Did these communities see the dead as still present in some way, guiding the living? Or were these actions purely about memory and honor? The geographic context adds another layer of intrigue. Both Qafzeh and Skhul occupy high, defensible positions overlooking valleys and plains. Perhaps the choice of these sites was practical, chosen for protection. But the repeated selection of caves with deep recesses and hidden chambers hints at something more: a preference for privacy, seclusion, or perhaps sanctity. Were these caves early temples of remembrance, or simply convenient shelters that became hallowed by repeated human use? Even more enigmatic is the demographic composition of the burials. Children appear frequently alongside adults. Some are young adolescents, others infants. Modern human societies often differentiate burial practices by age or status, yet here, the treatment seems more egalitarian, suggesting a cultural system that valued all members, regardless of age. This raises the question: what social structures guided these choices, and how complex were these early communities? In the broader context of human evolution, Qafzeh and Skhul challenge previously held assumptions. These burials predate the widespread dispersal of modern humans into Europe and Africa by tens of thousands of years. Yet the behaviors on display, the careful placement of bodies, the use of pigments, the inclusion of objects, resemble much later Neolithic practices. Were these isolated sparks of symbolic thought arising spontaneously in small communities, or did they represent a continuity of cognitive development that we are only beginning to detect? Speculative interpretations, while cautious, are difficult to ignore. Some suggest that these burials reflect early forms of ancestor veneration, an awareness of lineage and heritage. Others wonder whether these acts hint at proto-religious beliefs, an embryonic spirituality that connected humans to forces or entities unseen. The very fact that humans invested time and care into the treatment of the dead suggests that cognition, empathy, and abstract thought were far more advanced than the skeletal record alone can reveal. Yet for all we have uncovered, so much remains shrouded. The caves preserve bodies but not words, tools but not thoughts. We can measure ochre, note body positions, and trace the wear on flint artifacts, but we cannot hear the voices that spoke over these burials, cannot see the faces of those who grieved, cannot know whether the actions were motivated by fear, reverence, or something entirely beyond our comprehension. Qafzeh and Skhul thus stand as silent witnesses, offering glimpses into the minds of humans who lived over 100,000 years ago. Their careful burials testify to awareness, to planning, to a consideration of life beyond immediate survival. And yet, the meaning of these actions, whether ritual, symbolic, or purely practical, remains elusive, inviting questions rather than providing answers. As we peer into these darkened caves, imagining the flicker of torchlight on limestone walls, the shadows of early humans at work, we are confronted by the profound mystery of what it means to be human. How did these early Homo sapiens understand themselves, their mortality, and their place in the world? Were these burials the beginnings of culture, the roots of religion, or something else entirely, lost to time? And if such awareness existed here, in the hills of northern Palestine, what other traces of cognition, of care, of ritual remain hidden in the silent caves of the past, waiting for the patient work of discovery? The answers remain just out of reach, leaving us with only the enduring question. In the quiet stillness of Qafzeh and Skhul, beneath layers of earth and centuries, what more might the dead tell us if only we could listen closely enough? From the caves of northern Palestine and the meticulously prepared burials of Qafzeh and Skhul, our journey now stretches across millennia and continents, toward landscapes shaped not by fire or soil alone, but by the rhythm of human hands. Here, amid riverbeds, gravel terraces, and open plains, one of humanity's most enduring tools emerges. Timeless in form, yet enigmatic in purpose. The Acheulean Handaxe. Picture a river valley in East Africa, perhaps in the rift or the windswept plains of Europe. Sunlight glints off stone, casting sharp reflections on pebbles and cobbles strewn across the earth. Among these lies a handaxe, picked from the sediment, shaped with a precision that belies its age. Its edges are sharp, the symmetry striking. Paleolithic artisans, working with raw stone over 1.5 million years ago, chipped away flakes in a deliberate dance of form and function. And yet, as impressive as the craft may seem, the true mystery is not only in the making, but in the astonishing longevity of the design itself. Acheulean handaxes appear in the archaeological record as early as 1.76 million BC, first in Africa, and persist in remarkably similar forms across the Old World until as late as 130,000 BC. Think of that, a single tool type used by countless generations of Homo erectus and later by early Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, spanning over 1 million years with little fundamental change. Across continents, the form remained recognizable, oval or teardrop-shaped, bifacially flaked, pointed at one end, broad at the other. The design was functional, yes, but also remarkably consistent. What compelled early humans to replicate the same tool for such an extraordinary span of time? Mainstream interpretations emphasize utility. The handaxe was versatile: a butcher's knife, a digger, a scraper, and perhaps even a defensive weapon. Its symmetry made it effective, easy to handle, and durable. Anthropologists suggest that the repeated success of this design meant there was little reason to innovate further. If it worked, why change it? Yet this explanation, practical as it may be, only partially captures the enigma. Even today, with our understanding of ergonomics, raw materials, and tool efficiency, few would choose to maintain the exact same design for over 1 million years without question. Consider, too, the subtle variations within the handaxes. Some are finely flaked, polished, and painstakingly shaped, while others are cruder, hastily chipped. Was this difference a matter of skill, of purpose, or something deeper? Perhaps a reflection of social identity, status, or even aesthetic preference. The oldest handaxes show remarkable craftsmanship, hinting at both technical knowledge and cognitive sophistication. Early humans were not simply shaping stone to survive. They were experimenting with balance, weight, and symmetry. In the act of making, they were thinking, planning, and envisioning. Speculation arises naturally when considering the longevity of the Acheulean handaxe. Could these tools have carried meaning beyond the practical? Some archaeologists have proposed that handaxes were early expressions of symbolic thought. Perhaps their symmetry was aesthetically satisfying, a form of prehistoric art that persisted across generations. Perhaps in selecting and crafting a stone, humans were making a statement, not just about survival, but about themselves, about skill, and about knowledge passed down through learning. Even the locations where handaxes are found add to the mystery. Often, they appear far from obvious habitation sites, scattered across open landscapes or near water sources, sometimes in isolation. Did early humans leave them intentionally, as markers, or are these mere remnants of forgotten activity? Could some have served as social tools, exchanged between groups, or displayed to demonstrate prowess? Or were they simply practical instruments, the echoes of daily labor now frozen in stone? The technological constancy of the Acheulean handaxe raises deeper questions about cognitive evolution. Modern humans are capable of innovation, adaptation, and experimentation. Yet, for over 1 million years, early humans retained a single tool form, subtly refined but fundamentally unchanged. Was this an indication of conservative learning, a cautious approach to innovation? Or was it a deliberate choice, a cultural tradition encoded in each generation, reflecting a balance between risk and necessity? There is also the question of survival and environmental change. Over the millennia, climates shifted, landscapes transformed, and faunal populations evolved. Ice ages came and went, deserts expanded, forests retreated, and still the Handaxe remained. Its persistence across such dramatic shifts suggests a remarkable adaptability in its design, a tool that could endure not just the wear of use, but the turbulence of geological time. Yet why did it eventually disappear? By the Middle Paleolithic, more specialized tools and composite implements began to emerge, signaling a shift in cognition and social complexity. Did these innovations render the Handaxe obsolete? Or did cultural and environmental pressures finally tip the balance toward novelty? Some speculative theories stretch further. Could the Acheulean Handaxe have held ritualistic significance, functioning as an early talisman or object of status? Certain exceptionally large or finely made examples hint at purposes beyond mere utility. Perhaps some Handaxes were deliberately crafted to be admired, displayed, or even gifted. The line between tool and symbol blurs, suggesting that our ancestors were not only practical but perceptive, capable of assigning meaning to objects in ways we are only beginning to understand. And yet, for all the study, analysis, and experiment, the Handaxe retains its quiet mystery. It is at once mundane and extraordinary, a simple stone and a bridge across 1,000,000 years of human thought. Its sharp edges whisper of hands long gone, of lives lived in pursuit of sustenance, of understanding, and of connection. It invites us to consider the continuity of human ingenuity, the ways in which necessity and creativity intertwine, and the long, patient rhythm of evolution itself. The Acheulean Handaxe reminds us that some mysteries endure not because they are unsolvable, but because they span epochs. They challenge us to look beyond immediate function, to ponder intention, culture, and the mind of early humans. In the quiet fields, riverbeds, and gravel terraces where they are discovered, they speak across millennia, urging us to ask, why did such a simple design persist for so long? What does its longevity reveal about the minds of our ancestors, their choices, and the threads of tradition they wove into the fabric of daily life? As we hold a Handaxe in our imagination, feeling its weight, tracing its edges, and contemplating the generations that shaped and reshaped its form, we are left with an enduring question. Among the countless tools lost to time, what other innovations, expressions, or acts of intelligence remain hidden, waiting to be unearthed to reveal yet another layer of our shared prehistoric story? From the rugged plains and riverbeds where Acheulean Handaxes lay, our journey now moves westward to a quiet corner of central France, where a low hill shelters a hidden trove of human imagination. Here, in the La Marche Cave complex near the commune of Lussac-les-Châteaux, the walls themselves bear witness to the minds of humans long vanished, etched not in stone or bone, but in the delicate language of line and form. The first step into La Marche is striking. Narrow entrances lead into chambers dimly lit by the faintest seepage of daylight, or, in the time of their creation, perhaps by flickering torches that cast moving shadows across limestone walls. The air is cool and musty, carrying the faint scent of earth and time. And then, almost immediately, the engravings begin to reveal themselves. Hundreds of small, precise incisions, arranged into panels that stretch across the walls, forming figures, patterns, and enigmatic sequences. At first glance, they seem ordinary, even decorative, but as the eye lingers, a remarkable complexity emerges. Discovered in the 1930s and meticulously studied over subsequent decades, the La Marche engravings date to approximately 15,000 BC, during the Magdalenian period of the Upper Paleolithic. They are extraordinary not only for their age, but for their subject matter. Unlike the more commonly celebrated cave paintings of Lascaux or Chauvet, which depict animals in sweeping, dynamic gestures. La Marche offers intimate glimpses of humans themselves. Crowds of tiny figures populate the walls, engaged in hunting, dancing, or standing in ways that suggest gesture, posture, and perhaps social interaction. Their proportions are carefully observed. Individual faces, profiles, and even hints of clothing are rendered with astonishing attention to detail. What fascinates researchers is not only the precision but the sheer ambition of the project. Hundreds of figures, meticulously engraved into the limestone, suggest not a fleeting act, but sustained work, possibly over months or years. The engravings show a remarkable command of perspective, a rudimentary attempt to convey depth and movement. Hands are detailed, faces individualized. Could these have been portraits, records of communal life, or visual stories passed from one generation to another? Mainstream archaeology interprets the La Marche engravings as one of the earliest examples of figurative human art, a testament to the cognitive and social sophistication of Upper Paleolithic people. Yet questions abound. Why so many human figures when so much prehistoric art centers on animals? What stories or beliefs might these panels have conveyed, and for whom? Were they meant for communal reflection, ritual performance, or private contemplation? The answers are obscured by millennia of silence. Some aspects of the site provoke even deeper curiosity. Many of the figures are positioned in sequences, suggesting action or narrative. A hunting scene may unfold across multiple panels, while elsewhere, a group of figures appears to interact, their gestures precise and deliberate. Could these sequences represent memory, instruction, or myth? Or were they simply aesthetic exercises, early experiments in the power of the human image? The method itself invites speculation. The engravings were made by incising the limestone surface with sharp tools, likely flint. Lines vary in depth and precision, hinting at experimentation and refinement. Some panels are densely packed, while others are more sparse, perhaps reflecting changes in intention, audience, or available time. In creating these images, prehistoric humans were not merely recording, they were interpreting, choosing what to emphasize and how to convey meaning. Then there is the mystery of context. La Marche lies in a region rich in prehistoric habitation, yet no clear associated settlement has been found directly connected to the cave. Did groups travel specifically to these chambers to engrave and perhaps perform rituals? Were the walls themselves sacred, or simply ideal surfaces waiting to be marked? And why were these particular motifs chosen, humans in crowds, in intricate arrangements, while neighboring sites emphasize animals, tools, or abstract symbols? Speculative theories naturally arise from such anomalies. Some researchers have proposed that La Marche represents an early form of social documentation, an attempt to record group events, kinship, or hierarchies. Others wonder whether it could reflect proto-religious or shamanic activity, a way to connect with unseen forces or commemorate the dead. Could these tiny figures, etched so meticulously, have carried significance akin to ancestral spirits or acted as guides for communal memory? Yet these ideas remain speculative, carefully balanced between curiosity and evidence. No writing survives. No explicit explanation accompanies the images. We can measure lines, analyze tool marks, and compare stylistic features, but the thoughts, intentions, and experiences of those who created the engravings remain lost. Still, the very act of creation speaks volumes about human imagination, social awareness, and cognitive complexity during the Upper Paleolithic. La Marche challenges assumptions about prehistoric humans and their capabilities. We often imagine early artists as primarily concerned with survival, with daily labor leaving little room for abstraction. But here, within these quiet chambers, we see patience, precision, and the deliberate crafting of visual narratives. The engravings suggest communities capable of reflection, storytelling, and perhaps a deep awareness of their own social world. The intimate scale of the human figures adds another layer of mystery. These are not monumental, heroic images designed to awe. They are small, detailed, personal. Was this deliberate? Were they intended to be studied up close, observed with attention, perhaps by initiates or members of the group? If so, what rituals or traditions surrounded the viewing, and how might these have shaped the social fabric of the community? And then there is the question of legacy. La Marche is unique in its emphasis on human figures, yet it sits among a constellation of prehistoric art sites across Europe. Why did this particular tradition emerge here, at this moment in time? Were these engravings part of a broader cultural movement, a local innovation, or the product of an individual artist whose vision happened to survive? As we stand before the imagined walls, tracing the delicate lines of human figures, we are reminded that the story of prehistoric art is far from complete. Each panel, each gesture, each crowd of etched individuals is a window into a mind and a society that existed 15,000 years ago. The engravings invite reflection, curiosity, and wonder, reminding us that the impulse to depict, to record, and to communicate is as old as our species itself. In the end, the La Marche engravings leave us with more questions than answers. What drove these early humans to depict one another with such care and repetition? Were these images records of daily life, maps of social networks, or symbolic acts imbued with meaning we can only guess at? And how many other stories, etched on walls or buried beneath soil, remain hidden, waiting to illuminate the depths of human thought and creativity in a time we can barely imagine? The cave remains silent now, the figures frozen in limestone, yet they continue to speak across millennia. They ask us to consider the mind that created them, the hands that carved them, and the world that shaped both. And in their quiet, enigmatic presence, we are left to wonder, what else might human imagination have produced in the shadows of prehistory, leaving traces that challenge, inspire, and forever elude our understanding? From the intimate human scenes etched on the walls of La Marche, our journey now moves eastward, across the windswept plains and frozen landscapes of Upper Paleolithic Europe. Here, the human story is written not on stone, but in bone, massive, weathered, and strangely arranged. In the region surrounding Pavlov, in what is now the Czech Republic, archaeologists uncovered structures unlike anything else from this period. Circles and enclosures constructed entirely from the bones of mammoths. Imagine the site as it may have appeared 25,000 years ago. The wind sweeps across a broad, cold plain. Snow crunches underfoot. And amid this harsh, icy environment, enormous bones rise from the frozen ground, arranged with precision. A mammoth skull here, a tusk there, forming concentric circles, partial walls, or perhaps crude shelters. The sheer scale is staggering. Ribs the size of small trees, vertebrae stacked like architectural blocks, tusks curving outward in dramatic arcs. These are not casual deposits of food remains. They are deliberate constructions, carefully arranged by hands human and skilled. The Pavlovian structures date to the Gravettian culture, around 25,000 to 22,000 BC. Excavations have revealed dozens of mammoth bones, sometimes forming circular patterns over 10 meters in diameter. The bones show signs of use, cut marks from stone tools, evidence of burning, and careful placement suggesting planning and design. Within these circles, archaeologists have found hearths, stone tools, and fragments of animal remains, hinting at a combination of practical and symbolic purposes. Were these shelters, ritual enclosures, or something more enigmatic entirely? Mainstream interpretations often emphasize survival. The bones may have been used to construct windbreaks, seasonal shelters, or storage enclosures. In the frozen steppes of Pleistocene Europe, timber was scarce, and large bones were abundant. Using them as structural supports made practical sense. Yet the precision and symmetry of some arrangements, particularly circular layouts, suggest that utility alone may not fully explain their construction. Why invest so much effort into shaping the arrangement of massive, unwieldy bones? Was there an aesthetic or symbolic component, an intention beyond the purely functional? Consider the scale of the task. Each mammoth could weigh several tons. Transporting and arranging bones into organized patterns would have required coordinated effort, knowledge of leverage, and social cooperation. These structures are evidence not just of ingenuity, but of sophisticated planning and labor organization. How did small groups of humans coordinate such monumental tasks in a world of cold, predators, and limited resources? The effort implies more than necessity. It hints at ritual, tradition, or shared purpose. Some of the Pavlovian structures display evidence that fuels more speculative theories. The circular forms, concentric arrangements, and repeated patterns suggest intentional design with symbolic resonance. Could they have been ceremonial spaces, sites of social gatherings, or perhaps early forms of communal memory? Certain arrangements seem too regular to be random, too precise to be explained solely by shelter needs. Were these enclosures markers of territory, expressions of group identity, or sacred spaces connecting humans with the mammoths they both revered and hunted? Intriguingly, mammoth bones are not always arranged in the same pattern at different sites. Some enclosures are complete circles, others are partial, with gaps aligned toward particular directions, perhaps tracking celestial events, seasonal winds, or migratory routes of animals. Is it possible that these constructions had an astronomical or calendrical purpose? Could early humans have been observing cycles of the sun, moon, or stars, embedding knowledge into the very bones of their environment? While such interpretations are debated, the thought invites reflection on the cognitive capacities of Upper Paleolithic peoples. The artifacts found within these bone circles offer additional hints. Stone tools and flint points suggest daily activity: hunting, processing meat, or crafting implements. Charred bone and ash indicate fire use, likely for warmth and cooking, but perhaps also for ritualized purposes. The juxtaposition of practical items and massive structural elements raises the question: did these enclosures serve dual functions, both sheltering the living and honoring the dead or the hunted? Did they embody a relationship between humans and mammoths that was as spiritual as it was pragmatic? Speculative theories even suggest that some Pavlovian sites could have served as meeting places for dispersed groups. The monumental nature of the structures implies that these were not temporary shelters, but spaces revisited over time. Perhaps they were nodes in a broader social network, where knowledge, culture, and communal memory were transmitted. Could the positioning of bones, the arrangement of hearths, and the scale of the enclosures have been a form of prehistoric architecture of memory, preserving both practical knowledge and cultural identity? Yet, despite decades of research, so much remains uncertain. We can measure bone length, analyze cut marks, and map spatial arrangements, but we cannot know the intentions behind the effort. We see the result of labor and creativity, yet the thought behind it, the reasoning, the symbolism, the stories, remains obscured. Were these enclosures sacred, practical, both? Or were they part of a social or cognitive experiment whose meaning has vanished with time? The Pavlovian mammoth bone structures also raise broader questions about human adaptation. These early people were surviving in some of Europe's harshest climates, yet they devoted extraordinary effort to constructing what appears, at least in part, to be symbolic architecture. This suggests a remarkable capacity for foresight, planning, and social cohesion. It invites us to imagine groups working together in the icy wind, lifting ribs, aligning tusks, shaping circles, and creating spaces that were as much about identity and belief as survival. Standing today on the plains of Pavlov, among scattered bone fragments and the faint traces of hearths, it is difficult not to sense the ghosts of those who labored here. Their hands carved, arranged, and positioned mammoth remains in ways both practical and mysterious. They remind us that human ingenuity is not solely measured in tools or shelters, but in the creativity, cooperation, and thought invested in shaping the world. The enclosures speak of relationships between humans and animals, between individuals and groups, and between the living and the unknown. They challenge assumptions about the simplicity of Paleolithic life and hint at layers of cognition, ritual, and cultural memory that we can glimpse but never fully know. And so, the Pavlovian mammoth bone structures remain a puzzle frozen in time. They provoke questions about purpose, intention, and social organization. Were these enclosures merely practical, or did they mark a deeper engagement with the world, with life, death, and the colossal creatures that once roamed these plains? What knowledge, traditions, or beliefs might have been embedded within the very bones themselves, lost now, leaving only the silent grandeur of their arrangement? As we peer across the windswept plains, tracing the outlines of ribs and tusks, the question persists. What else lies hidden in the remains of these ancient constructions, and how much of human thought and culture has been encoded in forms that we are only beginning to recognize? The mystery endures, inviting us to wonder, to imagine, and to seek, even across tens of thousands of years, the traces of minds as inventive as our own. From the vast, frozen plains of Pavlov, where mammoth bones stood in silent testimony to human ingenuity, our journey now spans hemispheres, crossing oceans to a sun-scorched, windswept corner of southern Australia. Here, in the arid reaches of western New South Wales, lies Lake Mungo, a landscape of pale clay pans, shifting dunes, and the subtle shimmer of a long-vanished lakebed. At first glance, it is barren, inhospitable, and timeless. Yet, beneath its cracked surface lies one of the most extraordinary chapters in the story of human history: the Lake Mungo Burials. The site's first impression is deceptively simple. Bleached ridges rise from the flat lakebed, dotted with fragments of sand and stone. The wind moves across the plain with an almost musical whisper, shifting grains of sand over remains that are tens of thousands of years old. And then, carefully revealed by archaeologists, the first human bones emerge, laid out with intention, with precision, in ways that challenge assumptions about the deep antiquity of ritual and symbolism. The most famous discovery, known as Mungo Lady, dates to approximately 40,000 BC, making her one of the oldest known examples of deliberate human cremation in the world. Her bones were found charred and scattered in a manner suggesting ritual practice, not merely disposal. Nearby, Mungo Man, discovered a few years later, presents another layer of intrigue. His skeleton had been sprinkled with red ochre, a vivid pigment that stains the soil around him even today. Ochre, in this context, is not merely decoration. It may symbolize life, blood, or spiritual transition. The deliberate application of color to the dead, so early in human history, hints at a cognitive and cultural sophistication we are only beginning to understand. These burials, dating from 42,000 to 50,000 years ago, challenge long-held notions about the timeline of human migration and the development of ritualized behavior. Lake Mungo lies far from the fertile corridors of Africa, Europe, or the Levant, yet here, at the edge of a desert, we see evidence of complex funerary practices comparable to those found thousands of miles away. How did these early Australians conceptualize life, death, and the afterlife? And how did the harsh, unforgiving environment of the lakebed influence the choices they made in burying their dead? The physical arrangement of the burials is striking. Mungo Man's body was extended, arms carefully positioned, and face turned toward a specific horizon. Ochre dusted his bones, seeping into the surrounding sand in patterns that remain discernible even today. Was this positioning symbolic, marking a direction, a celestial event, or a spiritual pathway? Or was it a personal or familial preference, an expression of identity in a society whose traditions we can no longer fully reconstruct? Mainstream archaeology emphasizes that these burials reflect early ritualized behavior, a clear indication of symbolic thought among humans in Australia tens of thousands of years ago. The practice of cremation, rare even in later prehistoric societies, is particularly significant. It suggests not only an understanding of the body's transformation through fire, but also an intention to alter, preserve, or honor it in a meaningful way. Yet the deeper questions remain. Why cremation for Mungo Lady and ochre for Mungo Man? Were these differences based on gender, status, age, or some ritual we can only speculate about? The context of Lake Mungo adds layers of intrigue. Once a thriving lakeshore ecosystem, rich with fish, water birds, and vegetation, the region would have supported human settlement for thousands of years. Yet the burials occur in a landscape now arid and inhospitable, emphasizing a profound engagement with place. Did these early humans select specific locations for burial because of geographic or spiritual significance? Did the lake itself hold a role in their cosmology, a site where the living and dead intersected, or where ancestors could be honored? Speculative theories extend further. Some researchers have suggested that the ochre and cremation practices at Lake Mungo may reflect proto-religious beliefs, perhaps a form of ancestor veneration or a symbolic mapping of the social order. Could these burials indicate an early understanding of mortality and continuity, a recognition that the dead remained connected to the living community through ritual and symbolism? Might the cremation of Mungo Lady have been designed to liberate her spirit, while the ochre on Mungo Man marked him as a guide or guardian in the collective memory of his people? Evidence from Lake Mungo also invites reflection on technological and cultural transmission. These burials predate European cave art and many other symbolic practices by tens of thousands of years. They suggest that early Australians were part of a global pattern of complex human cognition and ritual, developing independently yet reflecting universal aspects of human thought. How did such sophisticated behaviors emerge in isolation across the harsh deserts of Pleistocene Australia? What social structures, beliefs, and knowledge supported these acts of deliberate burial and ceremonial transformation? Yet, despite decades of study, the Lake Mungo burials remain enigmatic. We can analyze bones, measure ochre traces, and map the spatial arrangements of remains. We can reconstruct some aspects of the climate, diet, and environment. But we cannot hear the voices, see the ceremonies, or fully understand the intentions of the people who carried out these ancient acts. What drove them to mark their dead with pigment, to cremate, to select precise locations within a vast and unforgiving landscape? The burials also prompt broader questions about memory and legacy. Lake Mungo preserves not only the bodies of the dead, but evidence of cultural awareness, social cohesion, and cognitive foresight. The act of burial itself, careful, deliberate, symbolic, suggests an awareness of community, continuity, and perhaps the beginnings of moral or spiritual thought. These were humans who contemplated existence, transformed the landscape with ritual, and left behind traces that would endure for tens of millennia. Standing on the parched lakebed today, among scattered fragments of bone and ochre-stained sand, one can almost sense the presence of those long-departed individuals. Their choices, encoded in earth and pigment, invite us to reflect on the depths of human imagination, on the ways our ancestors confronted mortality, and on the universality of ritual across continents and epochs. And yet, the mystery endures. We are left with questions that remain unanswered. Why were these practices carried out in this way, at this place, in this time? How much of the cultural or spiritual significance has been lost with the passing of generations? And what other secrets might lie hidden beneath the layers of clay, sand, and ash, waiting to reveal more about the minds, beliefs, and lives of the earliest Australians? In the stillness of Lake Mungo, the silence speaks as profoundly as the ochre-stained bones themselves. It reminds us that human complexity, creativity, and the capacity for symbolic thought did not arise in one place or at one time. They emerged across the globe, shaped by environment, necessity, and imagination. And in that quiet, enduring mystery, we are invited to wonder. What else might remain hidden in the soil of ancient worlds, waiting to illuminate the earliest chapters of our shared human story? From the sun-baked plains and ritual landscapes of Lake Mungo, our journey now moves northward, across continents and millennia, to the river valleys of northern Europe. Here, in the rolling terrain of Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, Germany, the Tollense Valley hides a story of violence, organization, and mystery, etched not on walls or bones of the dead, but in the very sediment of a riverbed. Today, the Tollense is a modest river, winding gently through forested banks and marshy floodplains. Its waters are calm, almost serene, betraying none of the chaos that unfolded here more than 3,200 years ago. Yet beneath the soil and mud, archaeology has revealed a dramatic scene, a battlefield of staggering scale, frozen in time, where bodies, weapons, and fragments of armor lay scattered across a landscape shaped by conflict. Excavations beginning in the 1990s uncovered bones of dozens of individuals, many bearing clear signs of violent injury, blunt force trauma, arrow wounds, and sword strikes. Stone and bronze implements littered the site, including arrowheads, spears, and fragments of shields. Radiocarbon dating places the events around 1200 BC in the Late Bronze Age, a time when complex societies were emerging in northern Europe, yet large-scale warfare was thought to be rare. Tollense challenges that assumption. The scale of the battle is extraordinary. Estimates suggest that hundreds, perhaps even thousands of combatants were involved. For the period, this represents a level of military engagement previously thought impossible in this region. How did these groups mobilize, coordinate, and supply such numbers? What social or political pressures drove them into violent confrontation? The river valley, narrow and constricted in parts, may have channeled movement, turning a skirmish into something resembling organized combat. Yet the specifics remain tantalizingly elusive. What strikes archaeologists most is the mixture of the familiar and the mysterious. Arrowheads are crafted from flint and bronze, weapons that would have been deadly in close combat. Yet, some of the skeletal remains show injuries inconsistent with the immediate battle, healed wounds, signs of previous trauma, reminding us that these were real people, hardened by prior conflict, perhaps warriors with long histories and individual stories now lost to time. Some bodies were found in positions suggesting they fell in the river or were washed downstream, adding an eerie sense of movement, as if the river itself became part of the battle's architecture. Mainstream interpretations focus on regional conflict, perhaps over territory, resources, or social dominance. Yet, many aspects remain unexplained. Why this valley? What triggered such a massive confrontation in an era and region where fortifications and standing armies were rare? And why do the remains suggest that the combatants came from distant regions, implying the movement of people across significant distances for purposes of war? The logistical and social implications are profound. Speculation naturally extends into the symbolic and the ritual. Some researchers have noted that the Tollense Valley may have held long-standing significance as a route or boundary, or even as a site with ritual associations. Could the battle have been more than a mere fight for land or resources? Might it have involved ceremonial or symbolic stakes, with groups seeking to assert authority, demonstrate strength, or fulfill cultural obligations? Certain placements of bodies and weapons hint at patterns that are difficult to explain purely through chance, suggesting a level of planning or ritualized behavior within the chaos of combat. The human remains themselves tell a quiet, haunting story. Many were young men in their prime, yet some older individuals appear as well, challenging assumptions about the composition of Bronze Age armies. Cuts and fractures reveal the intensity of hand-to-hand combat, the lethality of arrows, and the desperate struggle for survival. These are individuals caught in a sudden convergence of circumstance and intent, their lives ending abruptly, yet leaving traces that speak millennia later. Equally puzzling are the weapons and artifacts. Flint and bronze are mixed in ways that suggest both continuity and innovation. Some arrowheads are mass-produced, others show intricate craftsmanship, hinting at social stratification or differing levels of skill and resources among combatants. The coexistence of simple and complex technology within the same engagement raises questions about societal organization, trade networks, and access to materials across regions. How did these disparate groups acquire, maintain, and deploy their tools in a coordinated clash? The Tollense Valley also invites reflection on the nature of memory and loss. Unlike ritual burials or symbolic engravings, this site preserves violence itself. Yet even in the apparent chaos, there is a pattern, a rhythm of human action and consequence frozen in sediment. It speaks not only to death, but to collective effort, strategy, and the capacity for societies to organize under extreme pressure. In some ways, it is a mirror of human complexity, revealing both ingenuity and fragility, cooperation and destruction. Standing on the riverbank today, the Tollense flows quietly, masking the echoes of conflict. One can almost imagine the clash of spears, the whistle of arrows, the cries and coordination of warriors long gone. The evidence left behind invites us to reconsider our understanding of Bronze Age Europe, not as a simple pastoral landscape, but as a place where human ambition, fear, and survival intersected with extraordinary intensity. And yet, for all that has been uncovered, so much remains unresolved. What precisely sparked the battle? How were such large groups mobilized, fed, and armed? Were there cultural or ritualistic dimensions intertwined with strategy and necessity? And what other stories lie hidden in the sediment of the Tollense, waiting to reveal how our ancestors confronted conflict, mortality, and the very limits of their world? The Tollense Valley remains both a battlefield and a mystery, an enduring reminder that human history is written not only in art, tools, and graves, but also in the scars of struggle, preserved silently in earth and bone. It asks us to look closely, to imagine deeply, and to wonder how much of our prehistoric past, its ambitions, tragedies, and innovations, remains buried, waiting for patient discovery. From the blood-soaked floodplains of Tollense, where Bronze Age warriors met their fate, our journey now arcs southward across the deserts of the Sahara to a landscape both harsh and enigmatic. Here, amidst the windswept dunes and rocky outcrops of southwestern Libya, lies Uan Muhuggiag, a site that whispers of human ingenuity, ritual, and mysteries that defy easy explanation. At first glance, Uan Muhuggiag is unremarkable. A rocky hill, its slopes dotted with limestone fragments and sand. Yet, hidden within its sheltering crevices, the cave opens onto a world frozen in prehistory. Inside, archaeologists discovered not just traces of habitation, but evidence of complex life in one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. Hearths, pottery shards, and tools tell of people who thrived here more than 8,000 years ago, long before permanent settlements appeared elsewhere in the region. But it is the more extraordinary finds that have captured the attention of researchers and enthusiasts alike. Among the artifacts was a naturally mummified human body preserved by the arid climate, a rare window into the physiology, health, and appearance of early Saharan populations. Radiocarbon dating places the remains at roughly 6,000 to 5,500 BC, offering one of the earliest glimpses of life in the Central Sahara. But even more remarkable was what accompanied the body: remnants of pottery, stone tools, and ceremonial objects, suggesting practices that went beyond mere survival. The cave also revealed evidence of early food processing, including grinding stones for cereals and traces of domesticated plants. This points to a society experimenting with agriculture, adapting to the challenges of a shifting environment, and perhaps establishing the foundations for later pastoralist and farming communities. Yet it is the interplay of the mundane and the extraordinary that defines Uan Muhuggiag. Daily life, cooking, grinding, crafting, coexists with gestures that hint at ritual, symbol, and imagination. One of the most compelling aspects of Uan Muhuggiag is its apparent use as a site of symbolic practice. The cave walls, though not as richly decorated as those of European Upper Paleolithic sites, bear traces of pigment and intentional markings. Some objects found within suggest ceremonial use, including possible figurines and elaborately worked stones. The presence of these items alongside the mummified remains invites questions. Were these offerings, status symbols, or part of rites surrounding death and memory? Did early Saharan populations conceive of a spiritual or social order that survives only faintly in the traces they left behind? Mainstream archaeology situates Uan Muhuggiag within the Green Sahara period, a time when the Sahara was a patchwork of grasslands, rivers, and lakes. People lived in relative abundance, moving seasonally to follow water and game. Yet even within this fertile period, the effort invested in ceremonial activity stands out. The preparation of mummies, the crafting of objects, and the possible use of pigments imply not only technical skill, but abstract thought, an awareness of mortality, memory, and perhaps the afterlife. How sophisticated were these early humans, and what beliefs guided their actions? Speculative interpretations deepen the intrigue. Some researchers have suggested that certain objects found in the cave may represent early forms of ritualized art or symbolic communication, possibly linked to social cohesion or spiritual practice. Could Uan Muhuggiag have served as a regional center for ceremonial activity, a gathering place where ideas, culture, and knowledge were transmitted? Might these early Saharans have perceived a connection between the living and the dead, encoded in the careful placement of bodies and objects within the cave? Even more puzzling are the physical characteristics of the human remains themselves. Analyses reveal a population with affinities both to North African groups and to more distant regions, suggesting patterns of migration, interaction, and exchange not fully understood. How did people move across such vast landscapes in the early Holocene? What networks of communication, trade, or kinship existed in this seemingly remote corner of the Sahara? And how did such connections influence the development of culture, ritual, and social structure at Uan Muhuggiag? The cave also presents subtle enigmas regarding technology and subsistence. Tools are present in abundance, including stone blades, scrapers, and grinding implements. Yet, some artifacts show unusual workmanship or attention to aesthetic detail, suggesting that function and form were intertwined. Was there an artistic impulse driving the creation of objects that were otherwise utilitarian? Were certain tools imbued with symbolic meaning, acting as markers of status, identity, or social role within the group. The environmental context adds another layer of complexity. Uan Muhuggiag was occupied during a period when the Sahara was transitioning toward aridity. Human adaptation required flexibility, foresight, and innovation. Populations had to manage water sources, track game, and cultivate or collect plants under shifting conditions. Yet amidst these practical concerns, people invested time and energy in symbolic acts, ritual burial, crafting objects, and possibly marking spaces within the cave itself. What motivated these gestures, and what does this tell us about the balance between survival and imagination in early human societies? Even after decades of study, Uan Muhuggiag remains a puzzle. The site preserves evidence of daily life, death, and ritual, yet the full meaning of these traces eludes us. Were the mummification practices widespread or unique to this group? Were the objects of ritual personal, communal, or both? And how much of the culture of the Sahara's early inhabitants lies buried elsewhere, hidden beneath sand dunes or lost to time? Standing at the mouth of the cave today, the wind stirs fine dust across the rocky floor. The sun illuminates fragments of pottery and stone, glinting like the echoes of distant lives. One can imagine figures moving through the shelter, grinding grain, arranging objects, tending fires, and performing acts that combined necessity with imagination, survival with ritual. It is a quiet, haunting reminder of the depth and complexity of human thought in the earliest chapters of Saharan prehistory. Uan Muhuggiag challenges assumptions about where and when complex cultural behavior emerged. It invites us to consider not only survival in harsh environments, but the emergence of ritual, symbolism, and social memory in a landscape that seems, at first glance, empty. What drove these early humans to elaborate such practices? How did they conceive of life, death, and community in a land of shifting sands and scarce water? And what other mysteries, hidden beneath dunes and rock shelters, might yet reveal the untold story of human imagination and resilience in the ancient Sahara? The cave remains silent, yet the traces of its occupants speak across millennia, urging us to listen closely. They remind us that the history of our species is not only measured in bones and tools, but in the subtle gestures, symbolic acts, and creative impulses that have always shaped the human journey. And in that quiet mystery, we are left to wonder, what else lies hidden in the sands, waiting to illuminate the earliest intersections of survival, ritual, and the human mind? From the windswept caves of Uan Muhuggiag in the Sahara, where mummies and ritual objects speak across millennia, our journey now arcs further westward and southward to the vast, sun-baked landscapes of Brazil. Here, in the Serra da Capivara National Park of Piauí, rocky cliffs rise abruptly from the dry savanna, their surfaces etched with the faint impressions of human life long past. This is a place where stone shelters and canyon walls preserve the whispers of people who lived tens of thousands of years ago. A place where the mysteries of human antiquity merge with the artistry of survival. The Serra da Capivara region is at once rugged and intimate. Jagged limestone cliffs and mesas interspersed with narrow valleys, some dotted with seasonal streams that sustain the sparse vegetation of this semi-arid terrain. The caves and rock shelters are often modest in size, their entrances low and shadowed, yet inside they open onto walls that have become the canvas for some of the oldest known examples of prehistoric rock art in the Americas. Here, the colors of ochre, hematite, and clay survive in subtle reds, yellows, and browns, capturing the forms of humans, animals, and abstract symbols. Excavations and studies have revealed that human occupation of Serra da Capivara dates back at least 25,000 years BC, and possibly earlier. Stone tools, Hearths and remnants of ancient dwellings indicate repeated habitation, but it is the art that captivates and confounds. Figures of humans appear in dynamic motion, hunting, dancing, or engaged in communal activity. Animals, sometimes rendered with astonishing accuracy, leap or graze across the walls, while enigmatic geometric symbols hint at ritual or cosmological understanding. The sheer number and density of these images, hundreds of panels across scores of sites, suggest that this was not an occasional activity, but a sustained cultural practice. What makes Serra da Capivara especially intriguing is its implications for human migration and settlement in the Americas. For decades, conventional thinking held that humans arrived in South America no earlier than around 13,000 BC, following the ice-free corridor from Beringia. Yet the archaeological layers beneath the painted shelters of Serra da Capivara suggest human presence many millennia earlier. Could these caves indicate that humans arrived in the continent long before previously believed? And if so, what routes did they take, and what adaptations allowed them to thrive in a semi-arid environment so distant from their origins? The art itself provokes further questions. Many depictions are unusually sophisticated for their age, conveying movement, social interaction, and even clothing or ornamentation. Groups of humans are sometimes shown in what appear to be ceremonial dances, wielding bows, spears, or shields. Could these images be records of actual events, stylized stories, or ritualized performances? Were they created for communal instruction, for spiritual purposes, or as a means to encode knowledge for future generations? The intent behind the imagery remains an open puzzle. Mainstream archaeology emphasizes that Serra da Capivara demonstrates early symbolic thought in South America and the capacity for cultural continuity over thousands of years. Yet alternative interpretations have been proposed, some suggesting that the sites may preserve knowledge of astronomical patterns, mythological narratives, or social hierarchies. Were certain geometric symbols markers of time, territory, or cosmology? Did the act of painting itself form part of communal ritual, strengthening social bonds and encoding collective memory? The shelters also revealed traces of practical life. Hearths, tools, and food remains point to diets based on hunting, foraging, and possibly early plant management. The inhabitants of Serra da Capivara adapted skillfully to a challenging environment, balancing the demands of survival with the impulse to create. How did they negotiate scarce water, seasonal floods, and the dangers of the wild? And how might these pressures have influenced the very art that survives today? Some of the most enigmatic elements are the depictions of humans with elaborate headdresses, body adornments, or unusual postures. These raise questions about ritual, identity, and social structure. Were these ceremonial figures, shamans, or leaders? Or were they symbolic representations of mythic beings or spiritual guides? The images invite reflection on the cognitive and cultural sophistication of these early populations, and challenge us to imagine a society rich in symbolism, ritual, and social complexity long before written history. Speculative interpretations naturally arise in such contexts. Could some of the geometric motifs encode calendrical knowledge or map terrain? Might sequences of human and animal figures represent oral histories, allegories, or moral codes? Or were they expressions of aesthetic pleasure, the sheer delight of pattern, form, and color in a time when art and life were inseparable? While we may never know the precise meaning, the act of creation itself signals a profound engagement with the world, imagination, and memory. Environmental and preservation factors add another layer of mystery. The paintings have survived for tens of thousands of years in a region exposed to sunlight, wind, and occasional flooding. The durability of the pigments and the careful placement of images within sheltered alcoves suggest an awareness of longevity, an intention for the artwork to endure, perhaps beyond the lifetime of any individual. What might the creators have hoped to communicate to those who came after them? Walking among the cliffs and shelters of Serra da Capivara today, it is easy to imagine the past alive. Humans moving carefully across the rock surfaces, hands stained with ochre, gestures deliberate, creating images that blended observation, imagination, and memory. Each panel preserves not only visual forms, but traces of thought, culture, and social cohesion, an enduring testament to human ingenuity. And yet, the mysteries remain. How did humans arrive so early in this region, and what were their routes and networks of movement across the Americas? Why did they invest so much energy in creating complex, symbolic images alongside daily survival? What cultural, spiritual, or social imperatives drove the sustained practice of painting for millennia? Serra da Capivara invites us to consider the depth of human creativity and resilience. It reminds us that even in remote, challenging environments, people were capable of imagination, abstraction, and symbolic expression. And it leaves us with a compelling question. What other stories, encoded in rock, sand, and pigment, remain hidden across the continents, waiting to reveal the earliest chapters of human thought and culture? In the quiet of the cliffs, the paintings endure, silent, vivid, and timeless, inviting us to look closely, wonder deeply, and recognize that the human story is far richer, older, and more mysterious than we can yet fully comprehend. From the sun-baked cliffs and painted shelters of Serra da Capivara, where early humans left vibrant traces of movement, ritual, and imagination, our journey now arcs eastward across oceans to the southern tip of Africa. There, nestled along the rugged coastline of the eastern cape, lies Klasies River mouth, a site that has quietly preserved the echoes of some of the earliest modern humans. Here, the collision of land and sea, of river and ocean, creates a landscape both inviting and forbidding, a place where human life has persisted for tens of thousands of years, leaving behind artifacts and mysteries that continue to challenge our understanding of prehistory. The mouth of the Klasies River opens onto a narrow rocky estuary, where waves crash against jagged sandstone cliffs, sending plumes of mist into the salty air. Behind the cliffs, sandy terraces slope gently inland, interspersed with caves and overhangs that have sheltered humans for millennia. Inside these natural chambers, the air is cool and still, carrying the faint scent of earth and salt, a reminder of the long cycles of wind, water, and human occupation that have shaped this place. It is here, in the shadows of these caves, that archaeologists have uncovered evidence of early Homo sapiens who lived, hunted, and crafted tools in an environment that could be both generous and unforgiving. Excavations at Klasies River mouth have revealed a remarkable stratigraphic record, extending back approximately 120,000 years BC. Layers of sediment preserve hearths, stone tools, and the remains of meals consumed over tens of thousands of years. Shellfish, fish bones, and the bones of antelope and other terrestrial animals indicate a rich and varied diet, blending coastal and inland resources. These early humans were skilled foragers, adept at exploiting both land and sea, a flexibility that may have been crucial for their survival in a region subject to climatic fluctuations, rising and falling sea levels, and shifting vegetation zones. Among the most striking discoveries at Klasies are the human remains themselves. Skeletal fragments indicate that anatomically modern humans, with the same cranial features as ourselves, inhabited these caves long before similar populations were widely documented elsewhere. The bones tell a story of resilience and adaptation. Individuals who hunted, gathered, and endured environmental challenges, yet also displayed evidence of care within their groups. Healed fractures suggest that members of the community tended to one another, providing food and protection for the injured, a social complexity that hints at empathy and foresight, tens of thousands of years ago. Stone tools at Klasies River mouth reveal both innovation and continuity. Levallois flakes, points, and scrapers crafted with remarkable precision demonstrate an understanding of lithic technology that allowed early humans to exploit their environment effectively. Tools were reused, reshaped, and maintained over long periods, reflecting a sophisticated knowledge of materials and an investment of time and skill. But the presence of tools alone cannot explain the full depth of human behavior here. What other knowledge, rituals, or social practices accompanied these practical implements? How did early humans conceptualize their place in the landscape, the rhythms of the river, the cycles of prey, and the movements of the tides? The evidence of diet provides further intrigue. Shellfish remains suggest that coastal resources were regularly harvested, yet some layers contain an unusually high density of marine mollusks, implying not sporadic foraging but systematic exploitation. Was this an early form of aquaculture, or merely opportunistic collection? The presence of fish bones, some from species requiring spears or traps, points to an intimate knowledge of tides, currents, and animal behavior. How did these early humans innovate techniques to capture and process such resources? And what social organization was required to sustain these practices over generations? Klasies River mouth also offers glimpses into more enigmatic aspects of early human life. Some archaeologists have noted traces of pigment and possible symbolic objects among the artifacts, though these are less abundant than in sites such as Serra da Capivara. Could these faint traces indicate the earliest forms of symbolic thought in southern Africa? Were they utilitarian, decorative, or ritualistic? The sparse evidence leaves room for speculation. Perhaps these early humans were beginning to mark their presence in ways that extended beyond the practical, expressing identity, memory, or social cohesion through objects and color, a precursor to the symbolic behaviors that would flourish tens of thousands of years later. The caves themselves hold clues about settlement patterns and mobility. The stratigraphy suggests repeated occupation over thousands of years, punctuated by periods of abandonment. Shifts in sediment and artifact types imply responses to changing climate and sea levels. Early humans may have migrated seasonally, exploiting coastal resources at certain times of year and moving inland during others. How did these rhythms shape social structure, knowledge transmission, and cultural practices? Did groups converge and exchange information, tools, or genetic material, leaving traces that survive only faintly in the soil and stone? Some mysteries deepen when considering the human remains. Cranial fragments show a mixture of archaic and modern features, raising questions about variation within early Homo sapiens populations. Did these individuals interbreed with other hominin species in southern Africa, or do the features simply reflect normal human diversity? The interpretation of skeletal morphology continues to spark debate, reminding us that the story of human evolution is rarely linear, and that sites like Klasies River mouth can challenge widely held assumptions about our species' past. Speculative interpretations also arise from the context of tool use and subsistence strategies. Some researchers have suggested that the combination of coastal and inland resources indicates planning and foresight, perhaps even early forms of social specialization. Certain layers show high concentrations of shells or fish bones, possibly reflecting communal feasts or ritual gatherings. Could these patterns hint at proto-cultural practices, ceremonies, social hierarchies, or collective memory, preserved not in art, but in the very organization of daily life? The Klasies River mouth site thus occupies a liminal space between survival and imagination, utility and culture. Its occupants were skilled hunters and gatherers, yet also humans capable of planning, learning, and perhaps even reflecting on their own existence. The evidence of long-term habitation, repeated tool use, and careful exploitation of resources suggests not merely survival, but engagement with the environment in ways that were deliberate, adaptive, and socially meaningful. Standing today at the river mouth, the landscape is deceptively tranquil. Waves lap against rocky shores, the wind shifts sand along the terrace, and the caves sit quietly, unassuming and ancient. Yet, beneath the soil lie the echoes of tens of thousands of years of human life, bones, shells, hearths, and stone tools that together testify to endurance, ingenuity, and complexity. What did these early humans see as they gazed from the cliffs toward the ocean? How did they conceptualize time, mortality, and community in this dynamic coastal environment? Even after decades of study, Klasies' river mouth continues to challenge and intrigue. The sheer antiquity of the site, its combination of coastal and inland resources, and the sophisticated behavior of its inhabitants raise questions about the timing and nature of modern human cognition in southern Africa. Were these populations the foundation of later coastal adaptations, the earliest evidence of symbolic thought, or simply a remarkable demonstration of human flexibility in the face of environmental challenge? As we trace the terraces and explore the caves, imagining hands shaping tools, collecting shellfish, tending fires, and caring for one another, we are left with a profound sense of continuity and mystery. Klasies' river mouth reminds us that the story of humanity is not confined to monumental art or dramatic discoveries. It is also written in the quiet labor, social cooperation, and ingenuity of early people, preserved in sediment, stone, and bone. And in that preservation lies the enduring question: what other insights, practices, or symbolic expressions might remain hidden in the caves of Klasies, in the layers of soil, in the faint traces of pigments long faded? How much of early human thought and culture awaits discovery, silently waiting to illuminate the lives of our distant ancestors and reshape our understanding of the origins of modern humanity? Here, at the edge of river and sea, the mysteries persist, inviting us to look closer, to imagine deeply, and to recognize that the human journey, its challenges, its ingenuity, and its capacity for reflection extends far deeper into time than we often realize. From the windswept cliffs and painted shelters of Serra da Capivara, where humans left vivid traces of ritual, movement, and memory, and from the rocky estuary of Klasies' river mouth, where early modern humans adapted to the rhythms of sea and land, our journey now turns northeast to the sun-scorched deserts of Egypt. Here, in the desolate expanse of the western desert, lie the cemeteries of Gebel Ramlah, a series of burial grounds that have preserved some of the earliest and most enigmatic human remains of the African Holocene. These are places where the dead were laid to rest amidst shifting sands, leaving traces of life, ritual, and mystery that endure even as the desert shifts inexorably around them. The landscape of Gebel Ramlah is stark and haunting. Endless stretches of pale sand punctuate low ridges and rocky outcrops, and the wind scours the terrain, creating dunes and ripples that shift with every season. It is a world of contrasts: intense sunlight by day, deep, chilling darkness by night. Amidst this austere beauty, the cemeteries themselves are subtle, often indicated only by shallow depressions, clusters of stones, or scattered skeletal fragments. Yet beneath the surface lies a complex record of human life and death, preserved in a way that few other regions of the Sahara can offer. Archaeological excavations at Gebel Ramlah, conducted primarily in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, revealed dozens of human burials, dating from roughly 5,800 to 4,000 BC. The cemeteries are associated with the late Pleistocene to early Holocene transition, a period of profound environmental change as the Sahara gradually shifted from a savanna-like landscape to the hyper-arid desert we recognize today. These cemeteries capture a moment in time when humans were adapting to environmental stress, experimenting with subsistence strategies, and establishing cultural practices that would endure across millennia. The burials themselves are striking in their deliberate and careful construction. Most graves are shallow pits, often lined with stones, and the bodies were typically placed in a flexed position. Some graves are accompanied by small clusters of grave goods, stone tools, beads, shells, or ochre fragments. In some cases, human remains show evidence of cranial modification or unusual postures, hinting at ritualized behavior or symbolic expression. How did these early desert communities conceive of death, and what did these arrangements signify to the living? One of the most remarkable discoveries at Gebel Ramlah is the extraordinary preservation of certain skeletons, allowing for detailed analyses of age, sex, health, and diet. These studies reveal populations with considerable variation in stature and robusticity, suggesting diverse genetic backgrounds and possibly interregional connections. Is it possible that these desert communities were not isolated, but part of broader networks that stretched across North Africa? Did they maintain connections with other groups near the Nile Valley, or even further afield, exchanging ideas, materials, or cultural practices? The diet of these desert populations provides further insight into their adaptability. Analysis of bone isotopes and associated faunal remains indicates a mixed subsistence strategy, combining hunting of savanna and desert animals with gathering of wild plants. In some burials, marine shells were present, transported hundreds of kilometers from the Red Sea. What motivated these long-distance movements? Were shells mere decoration, or did they hold symbolic significance, representing trade, status, or spiritual meaning? Ochre, often found sprinkled over skeletal remains, is another intriguing feature. Red ochre is a recurring element in burials across Africa and beyond, frequently associated with ritual, life force, or the marking of transition between life and death. At Gebel Ramlah, ochre appears in select graves, applied in varying quantities. Why were some individuals adorned with pigment while others were not? Does this reflect social hierarchy, spiritual role, gender distinctions, or something else entirely that has now been lost to time? The cemeteries of Gebel Ramlah also reveal startling anomalies that have puzzled researchers. In some burials, skeletal remains exhibit unusual proportions, cranial features, or pathologies not commonly observed in contemporary populations. A few skeletons appear to have been buried with deliberate care, but in positions that defy easy explanation. Are these anomalies evidence of cultural practices, genetic variation, or perhaps unique responses to environmental stress and disease? The answers remain elusive, but they underscore the complexity of these early desert communities. Beyond the burials themselves, the spatial arrangement of the cemeteries is notable. Graves are often clustered, sometimes forming patterns that suggest social organization, kinship ties, or ceremonial planning. Some researchers have proposed that the layout of the cemeteries may reflect cosmological or ritual considerations, aligning with topographic features, cardinal directions, or other natural markers. Could the desert landscape itself have served as a framework for belief systems, guiding the placement of the dead and shaping communal memory? Artifacts recovered from Gebel Ramlah add further layers of intrigue. Stone tools, from finely worked blades to simple scrapers, indicate technical skill and adaptation to local resources. Beads and decorative objects suggest attention to personal adornment and social signaling. Yet certain items are difficult to categorize. Small carvings, unusual stone fragments, or objects whose function is obscure. Were these utilitarian, symbolic, or ceremonial? Do they represent an early form of material culture that encoded meaning beyond the practical, perhaps an expression of identity or community? Speculative interpretations abound. Some have suggested that Gebel Ramlah may have been more than a cemetery, that it was a sacred landscape where the living periodically returned to honor ancestors, perform rituals, or reaffirm social bonds. Others propose that the variability in burial practices reflects the coexistence of multiple cultural traditions, perhaps brought together by migration or environmental pressures. Could the cemeteries offer evidence of proto-religious thought, early forms of social stratification, or even nascent conceptions of morality and the afterlife? Environmental context is critical to understanding these mysteries. During the period of occupation, the Sahara was more hospitable than today, with seasonal lakes, rivers, and grasslands supporting a variety of wildlife. Yet the climate was not stable. Populations had to navigate periods of aridity, fluctuating resources, and changing landscapes. How did these pressures shape social organization, mobility, and ritual behavior? Did the cemeteries reflect temporary aggregations of people, or were they maintained over generations as permanent communal sites? Gebel Ramlah also challenges assumptions about the nature of prehistoric mortuary behavior. Unlike sites with monumental tombs or elaborately constructed graves, these burials are relatively modest, yet the care evident in their placement, the presence of artifacts, and the selective use of pigment all point to sophisticated cognitive and cultural practices. What motivated this balance between simplicity and symbolism? How did early humans negotiate the demands of survival with the desire to express meaning, memory, and identity through burial? Standing among the dunes and rocky outcrops today, one can sense the weight of time. The wind stirs the sand, shifting the terrain that has preserved these stories for more than 7,000 years. Each pit, each carefully placed stone, each fragment of ochre speaks to lives lived, struggles endured, and a human impulse to honor the dead. Yet so much remains unknown. Who were these people in their daily lives? What stories, fears, and hopes accompanied them as they navigated the challenges of a transforming desert? Even the skeletal remains raise profound questions about identity and connection. Analyses suggest a mixture of robust and graceful traits, raising the possibility of interactions between diverse populations. Did these early desert communities represent isolated adaptations? Or were they nodes in a wider network of human movement across northern Africa? And how might these connections have influenced burial practices, ritual expression, and social cohesion? The cemeteries of Gebel Ramlah endure as both evidence and enigma. They document human presence, adaptation, and ritual at the edge of a desert that would become increasingly inhospitable, yet they also provoke questions that extend beyond archaeology. What did it mean to be human in this harsh landscape, to balance survival with reflection, community, and symbolic action? How did these early people conceive of death, memory, and the connections between generations? And what other secrets lie buried beneath the sand, awaiting discovery, to illuminate not only the past of this desert, but the broader story of human thought, resilience, and culture across the African Holocene? As we trace the contours of the dunes and cliffs, imagining the hands that dug, arranged, and adorned, we are reminded that the story of humanity is written not only in grand monuments or monumental events, but in the quiet, deliberate acts of care, ritual, and memory. Gebel Ramlah speaks of lives shaped by challenge and creativity, preserved in earth and bone, yet still open to interpretation. And in that openness, the mystery endures. How much of human intention, belief, and social complexity remains hidden beneath the sands of this ancient desert, waiting to be revealed? From the silent cemeteries of Gebel Ramlah, where early Saharan communities laid their dead with care, adorned with ochre and accompanied by artifacts, our journey now turns to the very substance that whispers across continents and millennia. Ochre. This simple earthy pigment, ranging from deep crimson to warm sunlit orange, has left traces in caves, burials, and toolkits across Africa, Europe, and beyond. Its presence is subtle, yet profound, offering glimpses into the minds of early humans, their capacity for symbolism, and perhaps even the first stirrings of ritual thought. Ochre is at once mundane and mysterious. A natural mineral, composed largely of iron oxide, it can be ground to a fine powder or mixed with water, fat, or plant oils to create paint. In the hands of early humans, it became more than pigment. It became medium, statement, and symbol. The traces left behind, whether in a grave at Lake Mungo, a hearth at Uan Muhuggiag, or the red-stained skeletons of Gebel Ramlah, speak to intentionality, deliberation, and perhaps the earliest forms of human self-expression. Yet the reasons behind its use remain elusive. Was it purely functional, applied to preserve the body or decorate tools? Or was it a bridge to the abstract, a tangible reflection of thought, identity, or belief? The archaeological record of ochre use is ancient and widespread. At Blombos Cave in South Africa, for example, finely engraved ochre pieces dating to approximately 75,000 BC display deliberate patterns, often geometric and repetitive. These small objects, carefully incised with crosshatch motifs, suggest not mere decoration but cognitive complexity, a capacity for abstract representation and perhaps communication across generations. Similarly, at Pinnacle Point, ochre fragments found alongside shell beads and hearths hint at coordinated behaviors, social awareness, and the emergence of symbolic culture. What did these early humans intend to convey through these marks? Were they aesthetic, social, spiritual, or some combination of all three? Ochre's association with burials adds another dimension to its mystery. At Lake Mungo, Mungo man and Mungo lady were sprinkled or covered with red ochre, a vivid statement against the pale clay of their graves. In Gebel Ramlah, ochre appears selectively in graves, applied with precision in certain burials. Its function may have been transformative, a way to mark passage from life to death, to signify identity, or to denote status within the community. Yet the variability raises questions. Why some individuals and not others? Why the deliberate but inconsistent application? Could it reflect personal preference, societal roles, spiritual beliefs, or perhaps even a form of early ritualized language lost to time? Ochre's use is not limited to burials. In caves and rock shelters across Africa, Europe, and Australia, ochre appears in cave paintings, hand stencils, and motifs applied to walls or stone tools. In the caves of Serra da Capivara, ochre was incorporated into both figurative and abstract depictions, from dancing humans to geometric shapes. Its application was precise and purposeful. The pigment was mixed, applied with brushes or fingers, and often layered to achieve depth or intensity. In these contexts, ochre becomes more than material. It becomes message. But what was being communicated? Were these early humans mapping stories, histories, spiritual beliefs, or social norms? Or were these acts themselves a form of shared ritual, a way to bind the community through collective creation? The use of ochre is also strikingly persistent across time and geography. From Blombos to Uan Muhuggiag, Lake Mungo to Klasies river mouth, ochre emerges repeatedly as a medium of symbolic behavior. This continuity suggests that early humans, separated by tens of thousands of years and thousands of kilometers, may have shared cognitive capacities that predisposed them to abstract thought, aesthetic expression, and symbolic marking. Yet, why ochre? Was it chosen for its color, its permanence, its rarity, or its association with the earth itself, the blood of the land, the material of life and death? The answer remains tantalizingly out of reach. Mainstream archaeology often interprets ochre use as evidence of symbolic cognition, an ability to conceptualize the world beyond the immediate, to represent ideas, events, or social structures with durable media. Ochre may have served as a social tool, signaling membership, status, or alliance. It may have marked ritual, denoted gender or age categories, or mediated interactions between groups. Yet, while these interpretations are compelling, they cannot fully capture the experiential or cultural significance of ochre for those early humans. What did it feel like to grind the pigment between fingers, to watch it stain skin or bone, to apply it to a surface in an intentional, meaningful way? Speculative interpretations invite further questions. Some have suggested that ochre may have been used as a form of proto-writing, encoding information or memory in patterns, lines, or symbols that only contemporaries could understand. Others propose that its application was deeply spiritual, perhaps an invocation of vitality, fertility, or protection. Could the consistent use of red across disparate sites reflect a shared symbolic vocabulary, an intuitive understanding of the color's association with blood, life, and mortality? Or was each context unique, a local expression of universal human curiosity and creativity? The preparation of ochre itself reveals technical sophistication. Raw ochre had to be sourced from mines, riverbeds, or exposed outcrops, selected for color and quality, then ground, crushed, and sometimes mixed with fat, water, or plant resins. This process indicates foresight, planning, and knowledge of materials, a complex chain of behavior that reflects cognition, skill, and cultural transmission. The pigment was rarely applied randomly. Patterns, repeated motifs, and deliberate placement suggest intent. Was this intent purely decorative, or was it imbued with meaning recognizable only to the community of the time? Ochre also intersects with other elements of prehistoric life, revealing interconnections between practical and symbolic behavior. At Klasies River mouth, ochre appears in hearth contexts alongside food remains and stone tools. At Lake Mungo, it is entwined with funerary practices. At Uan Muhuggiag, it appears in association with ritual deposits. This interplay suggests that early humans did not segregate the practical from the symbolic. Instead, the act of applying ochre could link survival, social identity, and ritual expression. How might this integration have shaped community cohesion, knowledge transmission, or cognitive development in these early populations? Furthermore, ochre's durability has ensured that it endures in contexts where other traces of human activity have vanished. Its presence allows us to glimpse not only what early humans made and used, but also how they thought and felt. Yet there is also a profound silence in its persistence. While we can measure its chemical composition, trace its sources, and map its distribution across sites, we cannot hear the voices that guided its use, nor fully comprehend the intentions, fears, or aspirations that motivated it. The mystery of early symbolic ochre use is as much about absence as presence, the gaps between what survives and what has been lost. Environmental factors also play a role in its preservation. Dry climates, stable shelters, and mineral-rich soils have enabled ochre to remain visible across tens of thousands of years. Sites such as Blombos, Uan Muhuggiag, and Serra da Capivara offer rare windows into this world. In other regions, ochre may have been applied, but the traces have vanished, leaving only tantalizing hints in soil chemistry or fragmentary artifacts. What might we be missing in regions where preservation is poor? How widespread was the use of ochre in the Pleistocene and early Holocene? And what does that tell us about the evolution of human cognition and culture? Even in its simplest applications, dusting a skeleton, coating a shell, or lining a hearth, ochre speaks of intention. Its selection, preparation, and application reveal foresight, choice, and perhaps an aesthetic sensibility. Its use bridges the temporal distance between early humans and ourselves, connecting tactile, visual, and cognitive experience across tens of thousands of years. Yet its precise meaning remains elusive. Was it a language, a ritual, a tool of memory, or all of these at once? Standing today amidst sites where ochre persists, one can almost sense the presence of those who ground, crushed, and applied it. Fingers stained with red, eyes observing patterns, minds connecting the immediate to the abstract. These are humans engaging with the world in ways that transcend mere survival. Each trace of ochre is a touchpoint with thought, imagination, and culture, a reminder that the earliest humans were capable not only of adaptation and innovation, but also of symbolic expression, of reflection, and perhaps of a nascent awareness of mortality and community. Yet, despite decades of study, the mysteries of ochre remain unresolved. Why did early humans choose red, yellow, or brown pigments in particular contexts? How did symbolic meaning emerge and transmit across generations? Was the practice consistent across regions, or was it shaped by local environments, social structures, and cosmologies? And what other forms of symbolic behavior, now lost to time, accompanied ochre use, silently shaping the evolution of human thought? Early symbolic ochre use reminds us that human history is not simply a record of tools and subsistence, but of imagination, abstraction, and connection. It bridges the practical and the intangible, the living and the dead, the visible and the conceptual. It invites us to consider not only what early humans did, but how they thought, felt, and understood their place in the world. In the red dust of caves, the stained bones of the dead, and the faint lines etched into stone and shell, ochre speaks across the millennia. It is at once material and message, tool and symbol, survival and thought. And in that interplay, the mystery persists. What did it mean to those who applied it, and how much of their knowledge, belief, and creativity remains hidden, waiting for us to uncover the full depth of our shared prehistoric past?